Where's my Kleenex box? Okay.
Yes.
We'll call the meeting to order. First item of business, public comment. Anyone wishing to provide public comment, please come forward at this time.
Hi, Donna Stone. I live at Worthington Country Club. I'm on their External Affairs Committee. At the February 3rd meeting, Member Gilkey stated that they heard that day that Bonita is going to be increasingly adding to the water supply from Hawthorne, which is a more expensive treatment. At the February 18th meeting, Fred Parton made a presentation on BSU's availability resources and what they expect in the future. In 2013, they had approximately 42,000 water customers. Their current capacity is 62,000 customers. They have room to serve an additional 20,000 units. It takes approximately 4 years to do a project, planning, financing, and designing, to increase this facility. In 2014, they say they are budgeted to update their master plan. I believe that they are already at the 62,000 customers now, or will be very shortly. They have on the books 4,500 planned homes on Bonita Beach Road. They are now talking a possible 7,500 in the DRGR area that we are discussing. There are also 7,500 homes that are estimated on all the construction now going on 041. There are also 1,500 homes on Livingston. So that's a total of 21,000 new customers. And that's on these areas alone. Add any additional homes in Bonita, and you're taxing our present capacity. This is very alarming to me, as I see no concern on their part to put in non-potable water lines at all new construction, additional water storage or treatment facilities. This growth that is a boon to Bonita is a danger to good water supply and control to the existing water customers. And I really think that should be your priority concern right now with the DRGR area, is the existing customers, the quality of the water, the quantity of the water that's going to be available, and whether we're going to have to go into the sub-levels and have to use a more expensive processing with desalination and anything else that's going to have to be able to meet our capacity. During the wintertime, our lakes or ponds at all of the developments are extremely low, and we're on water shortage now. And that's before we add additionally the 21,000 customers. We need to be very careful what we're doing in the DRGR area, and we have to look at that possible 7,500 homes extremely carefully, and any new development in Bonita also has to be of grave concern. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Filson from 28089 Vanderbilt Drive, and I'm coming here today just because I heard of the possibility of a new study being done. And one of the most alarming things to me was one of the prior council meetings I've been at, the resident came in and said this is an ongoing issue for 20 years. Now, I know that there's been a lot of back and forth, and I guess my concern would be if we're doing another study, that it be closure, that it be a final study. After 20 years, I know that there's going to be an ongoing learning process and things will change, but I guess I'm kind of asking for it to be as neutral as possible, so it's not accredited to one side or the other, as outside as possible, and really just to bring closure to the issue, so that way we can kind of bring faith back to the decision making and really move forward, rather than residents coming forward and saying, you know, it's a 20-year ongoing problem. So that's my only issue, is just if there's a new study being done, please let's bring closure to the issue and kind of move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional members of the public wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, approval of minutes. For the February 3rd minutes, I believe Fred passed out some additional comments, information about the February 3rd minutes, so it's fairly lengthy. Would you like to just go over some of those issues?
Yes, I found, I would call them omissions, and they probably were unintentional, but there was a lot of good information that happened at that meeting. I know at one point, I made the comment that I was sure that state statute provided for a dollar amount, that if you were below that you did not have to go through any kind of a competitive process. Audrey Vance replied that she agreed with me, and she even gave a dollar amount. She said she wasn't sure, but it was $35,000. I watched the tape yesterday to reconfirm it. There were a lot of different things that went on. I know that when we were having a discussion on the recommendation to hire Kevin Irwin, Nicole said, would you like to talk to Kevin Irwin? He's here today, because Paul Pass was uncomfortable. He did not reply. Secondly, during the final part of that discussion, again, same subject, Colum Hasty said, Mr. Irwin is here. Do you want to ask him questions? Paul Pass said, if we do it, we'll run out of time. Those kind of things, I think, are important. They need to be on the record, because Lord only knows where this thing's going to go before it ends up. The tape speaks for itself. Now, I did paraphrase this. I had a different plan that didn't work out yesterday, but if Karen or somebody wants to get into this, I can give her roughly the minute locations for the different corrections or suggested corrections.
If I may address the task force, I've had this situation with other committees in the past. When the city prepares minutes, they are not verbatim minutes. If we started preparing transcripts for each thing, we would pretty much be out of business. I mean, it's cost prohibitive. If you would like your documents, after they're reviewed by the committee, because this is I just saw them right now, we can incorporate them as additional to the minutes. But, the minutes will never be verbatim. I'm hoping you're not suggesting that we start preparing them that way. Thank you. Because it does become very labor-intensive for staff, and it's not a legal requirement.
Absolutely not, but I think when all the comments that were raised after
Right.
that meeting about how the process was done, that when there's comments from legal counsel, comments about would you like to talk to Kevin Irwin, who was there, and all, I think it needs to be on the record. That was why I went to the trouble to do this. Now, I'm more than willing to have somebody go through the tape and put it, verbatim, whatever you want to do, but I do think there's a number of things, and it's, I just think it needs to be added to the minutes.
I don't think that you need to add the tape numbers or anything. If you want to have that this is your reflection on the minutes, and if the committee agrees with you to it, just have it as like a codicil or an addendum to the minutes.
Right.
As long as you're not asking, for staff to do different type of minute process.
No.
That's all I'm asking.
No.
John?
And if I can just interject again along the lines of what Audrey is indicating, we have this process for a great number of official groups, the elected officials,
Every sunshine
the
meeting.
boards, all the committees. And I understand Fred's concern that he feels like certain things should be, quote, on the record. Unquote. I just want to assure you, they are on the record. The record is not necessarily just these non-verbatim written minutes, as Audrey indicated, and they're not intended to be the be-all, end-all of the record. That's why we have the meetings recorded. You can always go back to the actual tape to get a verbatim if necessary. So, Fred, to your concerns, they are on the record. I would suggest that typically the kinds of corrections we see to the minutes are things like, for example, if you go to February 3rd, in the public it's got an indication that Rick Lampert was here. He's actually Rick Barber. those factual kind of things, if we catch them, we should probably correct them. But even that would not be, binding on anything. On the second page, it indicates on the first line that it was Orlando through Bay County. It's actually Monroe County. So those kind of factual things, if we catch them, should probably be corrected. But I would be very hesitant to start going back and reinterpreting what we think is important or not important out of the minutes, because then again, you're only getting one person's interpretation of what should be added. The actual minutes are recorded, they're there, they're on the record.
I would agree with what John's saying, except that the major things, the most important things pertaining to that recommendation were not in there, and it shows what really happened. I mean, when the chairman of the meeting says that he's unwilling to talk to the person that we were recommending because we'll run out of time, that's how damn ridiculous it was. So I just want to make my point. Thank you.
Would it satisfy your concern if this was something submitted as,
If it was
An attachment
posted
to-
with the minutes as an annex, that's fine by me.
what do other committee members think?
I think that, that if each of us looked at the minutes from our own point of view, we would pick out what we thought was an important thing that was left out. And I don't understand, I understand where you're going with this, but I don't agree at all. I think that you are, I think that it creates a bias. I think that the city takes the task of putting down what they want in it. It's not supposed to be a permanent, or a complete record. And I think you're cherry picking it for particularly the number of questions that you ask that you see of great importance. And I think that we should let the city staff do what they're experienced at doing. I totally disagree with what you're bringing up here.
Well, let me say this. If-
And your criticism of
Yeah.
Paul Pass.
And if the rhetoric that occurred at the city council meeting about we were below the standards, we have to be at the highest, if all that hadn't occurred, it seems like there's a trend that they want to discredit what four people did, that we were not told that that meeting was a problem. That's why I think it's important it's on there. Now, see what the committee thinks.
Other committee members?
I would make a motion that we go ahead and include Fred's document here if we vote in the majority that we agree with it, and
Yeah.
just throw it in there. It doesn't hurt, and I think it's accurate.
I haven't had time to read
it.
it.
So,
I'm not going to vote on something I haven't had time to read.
I have no problem if we kick it down the road another week.
okay, we can kick it
another
down. I
time.
did read the whole thing.
So this would be as a separate standalone document that would be attached to the minutes, so
I
would
think,
you
I
like
think
to
it
hold
ought to
off
be
on voting on the
posted. It
minutes?
should be posted with the minutes, and I think the committee should vote that they either approve it or disapprove it.
Okay,
My
so,
motion would reflect that anyone else in the future that wants to write up a little objection or a change or whatever, do it, and we'll include that also, just to keep us all comfortable that it's an accurate reflection of what happened in the previous meeting.
well, I haven't had time to review it, so I would like to defer this to the next meeting.
That's fine with me.
But I think that if this is going to be posted with the minutes but not as part of the minutes, we can go ahead and take a look at the minutes and hopefully get those approved for February 3rd.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just suggest that this is, I believe this is to the March 3rd minutes, and we haven't discussed the February 3rd, not March, February 3rd. We haven't discussed the February 18th, and we probably should have that discussion. Fred, is this just the February 3rd or 18th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because I had given you comments on the 3rd. I think I have a couple more that I just picked up that
Right,
maybe were
and I think
simple
if
little
you have
errors.
something, we ought to put it in there.
Okay. Well, one of the things and just for the record too, and again, we can defer this, I'm okay with that too, but and I don't think I covered this last time, one of the statements that was at the bottom of page 3 stated that I commented that there is a plan amendment, if there is a plan amendment, it would be a waste of money. I wanted to clarify, and I think the record would show that what I said was if it didn't satisfy the data and analysis of a plan amendment, then we'd have to do it over and it'd be a waste of money. So it maybe just left out the whole impetus of what I was trying to get to there, so. The other ones, I think the other ones were picked up in these other minutes that were of the 18th meeting, actually.
But for the February 3rd, do we need to go through all of the comments that we had from the last?
I'm not quite sure what the group is doing. Are you deferring the February 3rd minutes, or are you passing those, or going to vote on those, and then at the next meeting also vote on Fred's addendum to the February 3rd minutes, which seems odd.
Well, what's the will of the task force? If the addendum is a standalone document to the minutes, we could go ahead and approve the minutes and then
Certainly could
approve
if
the
you wanted
addendum.
to.
Madam Chairman, I would suggest that we treat the whole thing as a package, because if you read what I put in there, there's some things that I think substantially are important to the meeting and should be in there. I will say that you may want to play the tape, and there might be a word or two that you'd want to change.
Okay, so is the committee okay with once more deferring the February 3rd?
I'd be happy to defer.
Do we need to vote on that, John?
I think your direction is fine.
Okay, so moving on to the February 18th minutes.
Madam Chairman, I have one nitnoid here. On page 5, I am credited with furnishing maps when rightly Dennis did those.
Which, excuse me?
On page 5?
Yes, I think they mixed you
provided
and me
the
up
maps
on a
and
couple.
right.
Page 2 also, I think, was your question, and they put my name on at the second paragraph from the bottom up on page 2. So I think
Right.
they got a swap there.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that probably goes to our suggestion that you try to, whenever possible, you think about it, to announce yourself before you speak.
Yeah,
But they're now on television so it should be easier.
much easier now. Much less confusing.
Okay, so with David's correction on page 5, and Dennis, you said that on page 2, there was a similar,
Up on the first part of the paragraph, second from the bottom, that would have been Dave Gallagher that asked that. And then, as he pointed out on page 5, I furnished the map, so.
any other corrections to the minutes?
On the bottom of page 1, and I think $4 million, and then later it says $8 to do the physical. There's something there wrong, and I'm not sure. The latest thing that you then furnished us from Phil Flood showed $3.5 or $4 million for the work this is the East Bonita work?
Okay.
East of Bonita work. So I don't know which is right, but I know $8, you can't do much for $8 with restoration, so something's wrong there. Maybe you just go back and double check that, I don't know. I think what you sent subsequent to that probably takes care of my question anyway, which was the cost, and it looked like it was $3.5 to $4 million versus the 8, but
Yeah, I think it was 8 million.
I
is what
believe
he
in the
said.
beginning, they had budgeted for 8 million, but they believed the
Okay,
cost
that
was
might
going to
be,
be 3.5 to 4.
it's just a little
That's
confusing, yeah.
what I
Okay.
was told.
And so I know Phil's here, and he could probably answer that. Also, on the second paragraph up on page 2, in about the middle of that paragraph, the Tamiami, it says the Tamiami is the surficial aquifer. I think what Fred Parton was saying was that it is considered a part of the surficial because it's kind of a two-layer. So I don't know if it needs clarification, but it's not but it's, I guess you'd say it's kind of part of it in some sense. But so I'm not sure if that's exactly the right wording there.
Any other changes or corrections?
Yeah, I'm sorry. On page 4, right above Roman numeral 5, that paragraph, it said 1,600 gallons in that facility. It should be 16 million, I think, was what should have been that. That was the capacity of the, I believe that was the wastewater instead of 1,600, 16 million. That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have any corrections to the minutes?
No.
Have a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
I'll second it, Fred Forbes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. And moving on to item 4, presentation by Kevin Irwin to discuss restoration ecology and how Bonita DRGR fits into that, background about the Lee DRGR process, connectivity between the Lee and Bonita Springs DRGR, the impacts of dikes in the DRGR area, potential impacts of the development of Edison Farms, and I'm sure after Kevin finishes his presentation, we'll have lots of additional questions and probably some questions on the upcoming work with the city. So, Kevin?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you today about your DRGR work. What I've tried to do is put together a presentation that will address the questions that you gave to John and John passed along to me. And if during the course of the presentation you have any questions at all, just interrupt me. Better to get to them then than wait to the end, because I know when I do that I usually forget what I was going to ask. Just a little bit of background on myself. I moved to Southwest Florida in 1974 in a professional capacity to run an office for the Department of Natural Resources. That was so long ago that DNR doesn't even exist anymore. I have been in the consulting business since 1980, one of the oldest businesses in the world that does the kind of work that we do. I'm also on the faculty of Florida Gulf Coast University. Have worked all over the world, but extensive experience here in Lee County with projects like, Florida Gulf Coast University, and with the Lee County DRGR. This is why I have to charge you to do the work if the council approves it. Over the years, I have served in various capacities, both here in Southwest Florida, throughout the U.S., and internationally as well. And the kind of work that I've been involved with in my firm has actually involved some of the people in this room that have either been past clients or we've sat on boards together and worked on projects together. I was really happy that you were able to get those questions to me in advance. That way, I really want to focus on the things that are of interest to you, but I also want to interject those things that I think you need to know, those things that I believe you should be thinking about. And what I'm going to actually start with is some discussion about the Lee County DRGR. And I think by going through that, we'll get to some of these other areas that you had questions on, like what's the impact of dikes? Where's the water coming from, and where is it going? The Lee County DRGR was, just a little bit of history about what happened there back now 25 years ago. 20 years before the DRGR work was started, the Lee County Board of County Commissioners had put basically a zoning overlay over this, 85,000 acre area in South Lee County to provide it some protection for water resources. And after 20 years of going through that process, having that overlay in effect, the board wanted to revisit the DRGR just to see what was going on, just to see what the impacts of their decision was, and if some of those land uses that they had determined would be compatible with DRGR, you know, with protecting water resources, if they in fact were compatible, all right? So I actually developed the methodology for a part of the DRGR study that dealt with looking at the water resources, and what we primarily looked at was wetlands. Most of the work that we did, all right, was not new work. It was going and looking at work that had been done by others over the years. The new work that we did was evaluating the historic conditions within the DRGR and then the existing conditions within the DRGR. We did our historical analysis using 1953 NRCS aerials, the old 8x8 black and white some of you have seen, that was called the SCS back in those days, the Soil Conservation Service. And in those days, it was a federal agency, their primary responsibility was help the farmers. That was the basis of the economy here, was agriculture in those days. And so they used those aerial photographs to be able to do soils analysis, to be able to work with farmers on how to drain their land so that they could grow crops. We chose the 53s because they were highly accurate and they reflected pre-development conditions, all right? And the 2007 aerials were selected rather than the 2008 because there was not much difference and they were higher quality aerial photographs. We used the best modern technology that we had at the time, which is still very, very good, and that was ArcGIS.
Were the photos taken from at the same time of year? In other words, did you take July photos from the 50s and July photos from 2007, or were they different?
Well, the photographs,
'Cause that's
we
important.
didn't take the photographs. All right, the Soil Conservation
Right, but
Service.
the ones you chose to use, were they of the same month roughly, or were they in a different
I have
season?
to look, and I'm sure they weren't taken at exactly the same time. But the nature of the work, it really didn't matter whether they were taken during wet season or dry season. All right, because we're looking at the features on the landscape. It's hard, no matter what time of year it is, to actually find the water by looking at an aerial photograph. Wetlands, you know, it wasn't a wildlife study. We had a lot of comments on people. Why aren't you looking at panthers? Why aren't you looking at wood storks? By looking at, you know, wetlands gives us insight into the health of the whole ecosystem. And that includes man, all right? Just how sustainable are the activities that are ongoing on that landscape. So all this is meant to show is how all of these areas interact with each other, all right, and become interconnected. I'm an ecosystem ecologist. I'm a scientist, all right? So much of what we do is reduced to mathematics and models. And, you know, historically, a lot of the DRGR looked like this, all right? There was all kinds of wetlands. This is the rarest kind of wetland in the DRGR, all right? It's, you know, it's a shallow, short hydro period wetland. If you are a wood stork, this is what you don't have anymore, and this is why you're on the edge of extinction, because these drier end wetlands have pretty much disappeared from much of our landscape because they were the easiest to drain just by, in the DRGR, undertaking agricultural activity. That gives you a look at what the 1953 aerial photographs looked at. And one of the advantages that we had as a firm in doing this work for Lee County is we've been here a long time. And we know these areas. We knew many of them historically back in the 70s when I started to work here, before these areas were developed. And it's not surprising how much of the landscape was wet back in the early 1950s. We're looking at what wetlands tell us about hydrology in the Lee DRGR study. And here you see a reflection of water conditions based upon the kind of wetland that we're seeing. You know, all wetlands are not equal. Some wetlands are very wet, some wetlands are very much on the dry side. Some are deep, some are shallow, some have trees. some have no trees. Some of the ponds that we used to have on our landscape had very little in the way of any kind of vegetation in them. They were basically ponds. And once we were able to classify those wetlands according to their hydrology, all right, then we start to be able to look at adding topography to that and actually seeing what the water did historically, where it was, where it sat on the landscape, and where it moved. At the same time that we were doing our ecological history, we were also looking at the existing conditions on the southeast Lee County landscape. This is where we used the most recent aerial photography. This is just 4 square miles that you see here, so it's a relatively small part of the overall DRGR. That's Corkscrew Road running right through the middle of it. This is the water management, that's the Water Management District's mitigation bank here in the upper left, the Corkscrew Regional Mitigation Bank. Every acre was mapped according to the Florida Land Use Cover and Forms classification system. This is where the math comes in, because we want to quantify what's there, where it exists, all right, and to a certain extent, the extent that it's hydrated, all right, and we can understand how much water is on the landscape by looking at the kind of wetland. Certain kinds of wetlands have known hydro patterns, all right, known hydro periods, known depths. So it allows us to get a lot of good information. So as we mapped areas, square mile by square mile, we wrote software to be able to stitch those maps together, and we're doing the same thing with those historic areas at the same time to be able to come, and I know you can't read that. It's not intended to be something you can read, but that's the whole Lee County DRGR now with that land use and cover mapping applied to it.
Kevin, could you point out the Bonita area there?
Sure.
I mean, I know where it is, but just so everybody, yeah.
Right there. The only thing that separates the Lee and the Bonita DRGRs is politics, and we all know that. Okay, so that's kind of why we're here today. So, you know, when I do this kind of work, I'm thinking about the last presentation, when I'm going before the board to present, to make sure, A, that they understand it, all right, and that they're able to make a good decision, all right, no matter what it is, a decision that's made upon having good information. And the analysis, this is the punchline. This is what, over a year's worth of work, came down to as far as, here's what you had on the landscape. This is what you have now.
You have to speak into the
Sure,
microphone.
I'm sorry. This is what you have now. This is what you had in the past. And the difference is highlighted there in red, all right? The bottom line that the commissioners were interested in was that number at the far bottom right corner, and the fact that they had lost 40% of the wetlands in an area that had been designated as their future water supply. And that got the board's attention right away. The nature of many of the wetlands also changed. Just because there was a wetland still there didn't mean it was the same as it was in 1953. So what you see here now is a graphic representation. On the left, that slide is the historic 1953 conditions. On the right, the current, at that time, 2007 conditions. A couple things you're going to notice. There's a lot less blue on the slide on the right, all right? There's a lot less of the dark blue, the really deep flint pen type wetlands that used to abound in the county. These areas that historically existed in the upper end of the Imperial River watershed, all right, a lot of those are ponds, all right? You could actually take a boat out in some of those areas. So what's happened is a lot of the landscape has actually been drained. It's been for the most part converted to agriculture. And as a result of that, the wetlands that are left are often partially drained. So you've got a lot of area that's converted, and then areas that weren't converted that have been modified because of the surrounding drainage activity. They just simply don't keep the water on the landscape to the extent that they did historically. And again, Dennis would have me point out, there's the Bonita Springs area down there. And you can just look at the difference between 1953 and 50 years later in 2007.
Could you, Kevin, on that map, could you generally point out where the boundaries are for the Imperial River watershed, and just so that
Yeah,
people
if
have
you-
kind of an idea of that connectivity between the Lee and Bonita DRGRs?
Yeah, the estimated historical boundaries are in the red. All right, so you can see these red boundaries here. I would tell you that just because I put those lines on there doesn't mean I have the ultimate confidence in them. The land's very, very flat.
Right.
And depending upon where a drainage ditch runs, depending upon where the rainfall event took place, those lines can shift greatly.
Excuse me, you're also pointing out Edison Farms when you're talking about the Bonita DRGR. That section is not in the city of Bonita Springs. The part that sticks out to the left the most, it still has the dark blue.
Right, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, but I mean, just for the record, people looking at it, seeing that the Bonita DRGR is below,
It's right here.
right.
Mr. Irwin?
Yes, sir.
But even though it's not at the present time inside the city limit, doesn't it have an effect? And if it were developed, wouldn't likely the water come this way?
What, can I go ahead and work my way towards
Yep,
that so
That's
that
fine.
maybe I won't have to answer it quite the way that you asked the question? I think maybe it'll become a little bit more obvious. But the bottom line is,
Microphone, please, for people.
the bottom line is we don't have the answers to a lot of these questions, not specifically. Let me get to the next slide here. The Lee County study aimed to evaluate the effect of land use changes on the landscape, all right? The commissioners had something in place, all right? It was old. They wanted to know if it was still effectual, and, if not, how to modify it, how to make it into something that would work, that would actually not just protect land use, water resources, but also be responsive to private property rights. Something that, when you pass a plan, there's a vote involved. And one of the things about the lead DRGR study that I really liked was the fact that it was so very transparent. I remember Dennis took part in some of the meetings that we had, Cullum did. There were a lot of people that participated in workshops that were able to provide comments. Those of us working on doing the work were made available to meet with with groups during the course of the work. One of the things that made this study as useful as it is the fact that we didn't stop with that mapping work that we did just to be able to say, here's what's happened to your water resources as far as wetlands and water quantity is concerned. But from day one, we knew we were going to integrate it into a model, something that would be a land use decision-making tool for the Board of County Commissioners. This is something I think, the city could probably use. The process here involved the Mike Shee model, which is a Danish Hydrologic Institute model. Those of us that work with integrated models, it's a very well-known piece of work. It's not the only model that's available. It just happens to be the one that I personally like because of what it's able to do, and also the fact that I can use ecological information, ecological data, to calibrate the model, you see, which is a huge advantage in different places around the world to be able to do that. Then that model can generate results that can serve as an input for site-specific models, things like mod flow, things like agencies use to review permit applications, to be able to determine, what they should do with your water specifically at that location. And again, this is to provide, a decision-making tool to to the policymakers, the people who actually make land use decisions. Remember the different shades of blue on the map. Well, what were they about? All right. Well, you probably thought, okay, the darker blue is the wetter, the deeper wetlands. If you did, you're right. That's what the intent was. What I did was develop a bridge between ecology, ecosystem ecology, and hydrological modeling. And how do we take that ecological information on the wetlands and put it into a module that can be put into the model itself? So quite frank, what we did was use the different types of wetlands, put them into hydrological groups depending upon the nature and extent of their hydro period. How long was the water stay in the landscape, and at what approximate depth? And it's not perfect, but it's a very good way of being able to take all of that information and put it into the model in a meaningful way. So this just shows how the model codes here in the upper left, all right, and our firm's codes were bridged to be able to address the different types of wetlands. So here's the deeper wetlands here, 7 to 9 month hydro periods, 1.5 to 2.5 feet deep, dark blue, all the way to the drier end wetlands down here, which have a relatively short hydro period, 1 to 2 months, and those are the lightest blue areas. So the other thing that's important as far as that model is concerned is just the topography. And we're really at an advantage here in South Florida, the fact that agencies like the Water Management District, Lee County, have been collecting really good topographic information, what's called LIDAR, okay? And when that information is made available to us, we can go to any point on the landscape and get a pretty accurate determination of what the vertical elevation is. Of course, you can calibrate that by going out and checking it with a professional land surveyor's work, but by and large, it's fairly accurate. So when you look at this illustration of the DRGR area, blue is low, red is high, all right? And you can see the highest areas are up in those areas closest to State Road 82, you see, high and relatively flat. And then when you come down to the south, here you'll see a break point where you get into a very short distance. You go from very high to very low. And that's about as close to a waterfall as we have in Lee County. Okay? But the land drops so sharply, anywhere from 6 to 12 feet in that short distance, that it's really easy to drain the area to the north into the area to the south just by digging a canal in the wrong place. Not having water control structures in place is very easy to do that. But one of the things that comes at you as you're looking at those photographs, and I grew up in South Florida and knew this to begin with, but it really hit home when you see how wet our landscape really was back in those days.
Excuse me, Kevin, on that, where you have that drop, now the Corkscrew Road cuts through there, and you really have it as a kind of a dam, if you will, and there's a big crossing there at the Flint Pen. Does that have a control structure, or is that just flow, or is it proposed to have a control structure there?
I'm not aware of any significant control structures along that road. There's a Water Management District canal on the eastern end of that, north of the road, where there's some structures. But by and large, that area along Corkscrew Road is old farmland, and there are a few small mines on the north side of the road. So in that sense, we're really lucky that there's not a lot there right now, although there could be in the future. So when you look at that historical conditions map here, you see all these wetlands here that are up on the top of that plateau. That's basically what it is. The land's very, very flat. Very little change in elevation from north to south. So when the water fell on that part of the landscape, it stayed there, to various degrees of infiltration, on into the water table. But just a very flat, wet landscape. And because of that, it's easy to drain it. You know, it doesn't take much of a drainage canal when a farmer's converting, you know, land, or somebody's putting in a subdivision, an orange grove, whatever, to be able to draw down the water, not just within the property, but also adjacent to it. From the very beginning in our project, I wanted to meet with farmers, okay? Those are the guys that typically have the longest history on the landscape. They know water. They constantly complain about it. They either have too much or too little. If you know any farmers around the world, they all have that in common, all right? But they're the ones that to us were key in the decision-making process. So we started meeting with farmers right away. But the other reason is because most wetland loss around the world has been as a result of conversion to agriculture. Wetlands make good farmland in a lot of places around the world, and Southeast Lee County is no different. So when that comparative study that we did allowed us not just to see where the wetlands disappeared, but why they disappeared, what they were converted to, and by and large, they weren't converted to rock mines. Some were, but a very small percentage. All right, most was due to agricultural conversion. So what you see here is the existing conditions mapping that shows, where those farm fields are that historically were wet. And again, if you look and see where that is, it's in the headwaters of the system. One of your questions was restoration ecology, and one of the answers to that question, what is it? It's looking at things like this, all right, to determine not just what you should do, but before you determine what you should do to be able to restore something, to put back some of the functionality of the system, you have to know what caused it to get that way in the first place. So you really need to understand what the historical conditions were. And, when we started the work, this is what we started with. This is the kind of, macro level, water illustrations that we had. The DRGR boundary there is the broken red line in the center of the illustration, and those water basins, throughout Southwest Florida there were identified a number of years ago, and just to give you a sense of how many basins there are. Those might not equate to a watershed, at least the way I think of a watershed.
Could you maybe talk a little bit? It looks like the Bonita DRGR is completely within that Spring Creek area, and the Imperial River is then a little further to the west. How?
All of Bonita is.
Is the blue Estero or Estero River?
Blue's Estero.
Right, but all of Bonita is within the Imperial River, Spring Creek.
Well, this is an old illustration. I'm showing you this because in the early 2000s, this is what we had to start with. So I'm not saying that it's that's accurate.
Oh, okay. So it's Imperial River / Spring Creek.
And I'm sure
Okay.
the Water Management District has done more work since then to have more finite defensible lines. But at the time when we were discussing doing this work, which was mid 2000s, this is basically what we had. A lot of good comes out of having the model as long as the information that goes into the model is good. Garbage in, garbage out, so to speak. But one of the things that the model output told us when we were able to run it at the end of the project there was just what some of the hydro patterns were, the existing condition hydro patterns. And, without getting into a lot of technical information, these lines here that look like rivers are not rivers. Okay, those are major flow pathways for water. It could be a canal, it could be a slough, could be a road with water running alongside of it. And you see that these darker areas, all right, have the highest quantity of water flow. All right, so this is now not so much water depth as it is just cubic feet of water moving through the landscape. So this shows where that water is moving through the landscape. And one of the things that it told us was the impact that the mines were actually having on the surrounding landscape. So much so that our recommendations, to the board were, as you develop mining areas, keep them consolidated, because when you spread them out through the landscape, it causes, immeasurable problems to the landscape. Far more difficult to manage if you spread them out. So we developed, from all that work, a restoration strategy at a very macro level. In other words, we didn't go in and buy Jimmy Smith's property. It looks like a great piece of property, all right? We're nowhere close to that level. We're at the other end, which is, these are the regions where we suggest the county go in and do more work, all right, to determine where you will have restoration opportunities, you see. And we prioritized them. And, you see the tier 1, the highest prioritized, the color of my favorite fishing lure there, the chartreuse. And there's a couple reasons, not more, there's actually many reasons behind the prioritization there. We looked at everything from the size of the property owned by one landowner, which if you are a 2020 program, for instance, has a huge impact, all right? You're able to negotiate with one person or one landowner over a very large area. A lot more potential for doing good things at that scale. There's also where it is in the landscape and the condition of the property, all right? You see this piece of property, here's Corkscrew Road and that waterfall I told you about, where there's a big change in elevation occurs right through this property right here. And the difference in elevation between this corner here in the northeast and that corner there in the southwest is plus or minus 10 feet. Wow. And that's the trying to remember the name of the mine.
RCH.
RCH
Just to
mine.
clarify, this is not Bonita, we're up in Estero.
No, this is still lead DRGR.
Right, but it's not in the Bonita
Right, but
DRGR.
there's a reason I'm bringing that out to you, okay? Bonita Springs is a beautiful place, has a lot of great things, but you're at the bottom of the watershed, all right? And what that means to you as the owner of the bottom of the watershed is that everybody is sitting on your head. Anything people do upstream has the potential to affect you at the bottom. So when you're managing your water down here, you need to be cognizant of what the people upstream, are doing, you see. So, and if this piece of property here was not developed properly, it could allow for drainage of the area to the north simply to be accelerated, all right, not stored the way it is now, and it would mean people to the south then would have the opportunity then to do something with that water, to actually to store it, you see. So at a macro level, that was one of the reasons why we made that a priority 1 restoration area. That's all farm field right now, all right?
Kevin, on that, I know that map, originally it was called acquisition map or something, so I know that it was listed as priorities for conservation or preservation and acquisition, especially with the 2020 program. Was there any specific physical restoration proposed or studied on any of that?
This is as far as it went for the most part, because, and again, it was the way the study was intended. We did not intend to get to that level of detail because we would have had to done a lot more work at a greater cost to do that. Plus, you don't want to get to that level until you do this first.
But Water Management has acquired some of the properties in the DRGR in the Bonita Springs area. For example, the corner of Terry Street and Bonita Grande, a lot of water flows through there. And I know that Water Management was dead keen on getting that corner and did in fact succeed in getting that corner. So Water Management has been able, even through the buyout, to purchase a lot of the land that you're talking about.
Right. Well, I'm sure land has been purchased since we finished our work in 2008, 2009. I'm just trying to show you the results of that work, okay? And what we were giving to the decision makers at that time, the board and the board's staff, as far as, you know, these are the highest priority areas as we see them for the following reasons, you see. The way I explained it to the board was, even if you had enough money to buy everything that we're showing you here, you would not be able to do it. You would not be able to mobilize the effort, the people, the technicians, the equipment, you know, the willing, you know, it wouldn't happen. It needs to be prioritized. So make it a program where you have willing sellers come forward. And if you're having to make a decision on whether to go with one or the other, this is one of the tools that you would then look at, all right? We've already done a lot of the homework for them to at least point them in the right direction so that they're making informed decisions. And, you know, that decision might be one of our recommendations, which would be, if this is a priority for you, all right, go in there and actually collect data in that subbasin, all right, so that you know exactly what your restoration potential is.
And are those chartreuse sections large pieces of property from an acreage point of view?
Yeah, this
Because,
is square miles, all right?
because in Bonita,
Kevin, on the microphone.
in Bonita,
I'm a
we're
wanderer.
dealing with, 700, I think if it's 700 dwellings are permitted within the DRGR, then you've got at least 700 people, because you've got these 5 and 10 acres. We're not really dealing with a lot of farm field in our Bonita DRGR. So what I'm bringing up is that you said in the beginning, the only difference between the Bonita DRGR and the Lee County DRGR is politics, and I think that there are more differences.
There probably are.
Yeah,
The,
okay.
The part of the DRGR study that the planning firm worked on, not me so much, was where the possibility for development nodes existed. Where's a good place to put people in the future, to live out there, so that we didn't get them crossways with water management issues. That was a whole nother part of the study that was, that was ongoing at the same time. But
And
it was
I
using
think
the
it's-
information.
And I also think it's important to point out, we know that the outcome in the Lee DRGR may be very different than the outcome for Bonita, but we asked Kevin to come here to talk about the process of what happened with the Lee DRGR. So that's why he's bringing up all of these issues.
Yeah, well, one of the things, and I've got a list of comments, some of them are probably out of some slight ignorance I have on things, but and I'll give you those later. Some of those will answer as you go, I'm sure. But one of the things I saw that was significantly different in the Lee DRGR, which was 83,000 acres, versus the Bonita, which is 5,300. There's like 430-something homes in the Lee DRGR at 83,000 acres and 2,000 on 5,300 acres in Bonita. That's 90 times as dense.
Right.
90 times. So I think that's pretty significant. Of what do you do about that, or how do you even
I'm going to address
compare?
that in
Because
a
it
few
is apples and
minutes.
oranges.
Yeah, that's very true.
The one thing you say, which I agree, and that's probably the other thing that separates our DRGR, which I think you said, which is we're the bottom of the bowl, the bottom of the bowl of the drainage of the DRGR. I believe that's what you indicated. The water all kind of flows to here.
Historically, yes. I mean, it's been divided up, but I mean, you're still at the bottom of the watershed, so to speak.
Can I clarify that too, Fred? I think, and certainly the Imperial River Basin and the flows to the Kiel Canal and to the Estero River are the recipients of that watershed. There's no question. That's the way water goes downhill. However, I think a lot of our Bonita DRGR is a higher area that has been historically higher. And when you look at the old arrows, you'll see that it pops out as a higher elevation, for example, than the pieces that are east on East Beach Road. Historically, this current area north of Terry Street was higher than the areas south of Beach Road where you live. I mean, so I'm just saying, you have to put it all in relative perspective, I think.
Right, and the east area you're talking about is the Flint Strand. So there is water coming from up there. It's not the entire state of Florida coming directly into Bonita. It's just the Imperial. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me go ahead and go on. And one of the things you have to keep in mind through all this is, I know some of you may not like the term climate change, but it's real, and it's happening. And whatever planning that we do in southeast Lee County, it definitely needs to take that into consideration. I know the guys sitting behind me with the Water Management District, you know, they were beat to death last year with where do we put all this water? But you know what? You turn around in this year and many of us will be complaining because we don't have the water. Where did the water go? And we've had more, you know, of those issues of late than we had with, you know, flooding issues, having water in the wrong place. And it's probably going to continue to have more of that. And what we're seeing in many places, you know, is that even if the average rainfall doesn't change, you know, the delivery time for that rainfall, you know, changes. So, you know, if it occurs when you don't need it, when you're a farmer and you're not farming anyway, you know, like in the summer, our farmers don't farm it in the summer. And if they don't get the rainfall that they need during the growing season, then they have to pump. So what I'm saying here is that, you know, when you look at land use issues in the land use issues in the future, you know, whether it's putting people in a spot, whether it's consumptive use allocations, you have to bear in mind that the planet is changing, and that, you know, includes Southwest Florida. It certainly includes the city of Bonita Springs. So water scarcity, you know, is just as much an issue perhaps as, you know, water capacity, being able to store water, and they're actually very closely linked. If we move forward in the future, you know, what I'm suggesting is a synthesis of the information that's already been done, already been collected for the city of Bonita Springs. I didn't bring it out of my bag, but I printed it out when I was on my way over here this morning to show Audrey. You know, and if I was a council member or a committee person and I'm looking at that long list of studies and having to make decisions, it would be really difficult. So I think one of the important things is to actually synthesize that. Do what we did in the lead DRG art so you can see what you have your hands on and how you can turn that information into a tool, something that will help you make land use decisions in the future.
Kevin, the one thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that the map, and I have a copy for you of the maps that I had handed out last meeting to the group that show the basins that were mapped in the stormwater management plans for Bonita Springs in 2010 and 2011. And I think what seems like what we would need is more of a little bit more micro than macro. The Lee County studies seem to be kind of a macro. I think what we need is a little bit more focused in micro of what do you do with you know, the specific drainage sub-basins,
Can you give me 2 minutes
Sure.
to follow up on that thought? The second part is actually moving ahead, all right? And that's actually doing some of the ecological work that hasn't been done, all right? So that we have something that then you could put into a model. The result would be something that may look similar to the lead DRGR results. But the difference, I mean, what Dennis is saying is one of the things that makes me excited. There's two ways to look at all that development. You know, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of expense to take care of, a lot of issues. But the other thing is, unlike the lead DRGR, you guys have got a wealth of existing information. You probably know where every pipe, every culvert, every bridge, every ditch, every lake is on the landscape, all right? So when you're running an existing conditions model, that's what goes in there. That's a lot of the information that goes in there, see? So you're able to get, I think, Dennis, to that micro level pretty quickly, all right, with that kind of a model, simply because you have the information. It's just a matter of having whoever the engineer is doing the model work with us to make sure the right information goes in there, both ecological and engineering type information. So, and that's the exciting thing about it. I mean, you know, this is a populated community, but it's also a very smart community because of some of the information that's available here. And, you know, to have this kind of an opportunity, I think, is a good one for the people of the city of Bonita Springs. And if if I had to coin a phrase, what would we give to you? I would want you guys to have a land use decision-making tool, because you don't have that right now. You've got some studies, you've got some good work that's been done, but what you need to have is something that enables you and your council to be able to say, well, what would happen if we did this here and we did that there? What's the outcome? What's the outcome for people? What's the outcome for water resources? You know, and still be able to relate that to, you know, water quality, wildlife, some of these other issues that are critically important. So when we got done with the lead, I'm still on the lead DRGR now. When we get done with that process, all right, a committee like this sat down and looked at our recommendations, all right. I made recommendations to the board along with Dover Cole, the planning firm, all right, but this planning committee also made recommendations.
Are these the 9 points at the end of the density reduction prepared for Dover Cole, July 2008?
The report that I wrote?
Uh-huh.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. And many of our recommendations were, guys, go out and collect some real data. Okay?
Yeah.
Don't necessarily do a lot other than determine where you're going to collect more information. And that was the gist of our recommendations. And the DRGR committee that was appointed by the board, they came up with their own, recommendations. And that's what you see here, on the map, as far as, what areas they wanted to focus the mining, what areas they wanted to focus conservation lands, and perhaps doing some restoration. So, and they're looking at the information that we provided to the board. We're all sharing the same information, but this is a mix now. These are not scientists, although maybe a few of them on the committee were. These are lay people for the most part, now charged with the responsibility of representing the public, the general public in Lee County, you see. So they're going to look at that information a little differently than we did. But we've done our job. We've made our recommendations upon our skills as scientists, but also the information that we had available. So the steering committee then made their recommendations to the board as well. And a lot of that had to do with where the water was on the landscape, where water could be put back on the landscape. The ecological restoration that I do is this kind of work. It is very large landscapes. The DRGR was only 80,000 acres, all right? I'm working in the Yangtze River right now in China, which is bigger than the southeast U.S. And those scales, like this scale, you're basically using the same math. The mathematics is not different, all right? That doesn't change. It's just the scale that's different. So, what you really want to do is, before you start a project, know your target. Know the target. Know the public that you're dealing with, what their concerns are, have a transparent process, and be able to apply good science. And the board, the information, the recommendations they got from the steering committee, I think were pretty much dead on the same as the recommendations that they got from their scientists, from myself and from the planners at Dover Cole, as far as how to treat that landscape. And the board ended up supporting it with a 5-0 vote. I don't know if you follow the Lee County Board of County Commissioners, but to have a 5-0 vote on anything is really substantial. And that was a good first step in protecting the water resources in the Lee County DRGR. This is just an overall picture of when you look at the life of this committee, as far as this calendar year goes, where this work fits in the shaded blue areas up at the top. If you were to follow a process, all right, similar to the Lee County DRGR process, because of the things that Dennis was talking about, for instance, all the information that you have available, it's a quicker process than what Lee County had. Not just because the size of the land is smaller. The difference between 80,000 acres and just over 5,000 acres is substantial. But the thing is that you have a lot of the existing condition information in there. So, you know, there was a lot less diversity in the Lee County DRGR than in the Bonita Springs DRGR. And by diversity, I mean activities. Doesn't have to be nature to be diverse, because of the people on the landscape are causing a diversity of changes to that landscape. So if you were to follow a similar process, you could very well end up with being able to run a future conditions model at the end. All right, and again, you know, you would first produce an existing conditions model, which is, this is how your system is working today, to answer your questions about what do the berms do? What is the sheet flow actually doing? Remember, we're not just talking about surface water, we're talking about groundwater too. Okay, so at that point, then you can embark upon actually looking at future conditions as far as what are the scenarios that the people in Bonita Springs would be, you know, interested in knowing. What happens if you put people here? What happens if you don't put people there? You see, and that doesn't remove all of the discussion. Okay, I should have showed this slide first. You know, Doug McGregor is brilliant. Okay, and in the DRGR process, it was, and many of you guys were involved in this. I mean, it was a very combative, a lot of passionate, well-meaning, well-versed, intelligent people that were involved in the process, you see. And it's great. I mean, I have to work with stakeholders to do what I do, all right? And when I went through school and when I studied what I studied, nobody taught us about social issues, how to treat people, fairness, you know, transparency. And the one thing that we did in that lead DRGR that I think really helped was the fact that all of those people holding up all those different signs that had different understandings, okay, we met with them and we talked to them. It's a lot. Didn't mean that we convinced them of anything, but at least they were heard. They understood what the issues were from a scientific point of view, and we had a job to do, and that was to give you our best recommendation, you see, and then they did their job, which was to represent the people of Lee County. But you know, as we went through the process, you know, it was pretty volatile, you know, especially early on. And I think one of the things that really helped was the fact that we had so many public meetings and really made ourselves available to answer questions of everybody. So, you know, I don't know that we can ever return to that, you know, everywhere in the Lee County DRGR, but it's possible to go back to that in many of the areas that were in agriculture. The Bonita Springs DRGR area is different because of the land use changes that have already taken place around it. But again, you have some opportunities and you have some constraints. The constraints, you know, we try to turn into opportunities, you know, typically. But you do have a lot of water available to you if you choose to use it in the right way. And that's coming from the Lee DRGR area, you see. That could be coming from the farms to that 6 sections of land to the north. If you look at the difference in capacity there, it's the same. In other words, it still has the ability pretty much to hold as much water as it did historically. It's not now, which means that delta is additional water that you could store on that property and make it available for Lee County, for the residents of the city of Bonita Springs, whoever, and also use it as a way to move the water from west to east, which is, last time I checked, is getting more and more difficult to do in Lee County because of the way the development activity has been oriented to parallel, you know, I-75. So I'll end my presentation with that, and I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address you guys this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
A couple questions.
Marjorie?
I just wanted, and I didn't want to rain on the presentation, I just, as far as discussions with the agreement, if you could go over some of the things, the task 1, task 2, most notably, they approved task 1 and task 2, and you had, like, I think it's task 8, the travel you may wish to bring to the committee. We talked about that this morning.
One of the things that we want to do for you all is not be a consultant that comes in, you see them in the beginning, we do our work, then we come back and see you at the end. That last slide I showed you, it's important to remember. We want to be here, for you during committee meetings, if we need to be here to listen, to be able to answer questions, to be able to have dialogue, and that holds true for your city council as well. This is a really important issue. So we put money in that budget to be able to do some of that, not all of it, but to really be able to address being able to go to meetings. I think it was $4,000 to be able to do that in addition to support those two tasks, 1 and 2 in there. Is that what you wanted me to?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right.
So then the request would be for the task force to discuss and make a recommendation on including task 8 for another $4,000.
It wouldn't be task 8 exactly.
Okay.
It is kind of a modified task 8. It is for purposes of tasks 1 and task 2. It would be for Mr. Irwin to be available, and I'm just reading from the agreement, for presentations to both the task force and the city council. It does not include any public workshops, because again, publics could take a lot of time, or any meetings with Lee County government. If we're integrating the two, that would be additional task.
You have to remember, when I drafted that early scope for some of you to look at, I didn't have any intention of having that task actually come forward and voted on. I was here on the 3rd of February. You need to know I was really uncomfortable, because that's not how I like to do my work. I'm very oriented to talking to people, making sure that if they have questions that I'm able to address them. And so, had we waited until today to actually give you something, that fee at the end would have been included with those two tasks, because you need to be able to do meetings. You need to be able to meet with your clients, so to speak. So that's the difference.
Kevin, a couple of questions. And I brought this up to the task force in an email, and I hope you got a copy. But basically, the modeling that was done for the Phase 1 update, if you will, of the 2010 Stormwater Master Plan for Bonita Springs was based on water quantity issues. So our public works budgeting is based on flooding improvements that were generated from that modeling from the engineers that did it. And then Phase 2, which was 2011, generated water quality parameters that then established water quality projects that our Public Works Department uses to meet the impaired water reduction of nitrogen requirements. Will this be tied into that? I mean, will this be an extension of that? Because, and I guess when I said earlier, is it going to be something that can be used for data and analysis for the comprehensive plan? Will this tie into that modeling as well, for those two studies that we work our master plan for Bonita and our budgeting and those things that we're already working on that include the DRGR area? I mean,
I would think so, Dennis, but having not read or studied those studies, I don't know the extent that they will. I think what we need to do is look at them and see how they can be, brought together so that instead of having 8 or 10 or 12 individual pieces of work, you have, something that's consolidated that allows you to take the next step and develop a tool. That's why the synthesis is just the first step in the process. I wouldn't think we would ignore anything that's been done, especially if somebody developed a model. That means they were using information that needs to be included in future work.
my emphasis has been that those are adopted studies, of course, and used for the city, but they're adopted and also endorsed by the Water Management District. And it's kind of to me, it's kind of our marching orders. And in my view, we need to refine those and say, okay, is there some alternate land uses that then work with that, versus another model that may be inconsistent, or say, well, if it's inconsistent with either the water quality or the flooding aspects, well, then it's probably not as useful. So I just want to make sure.
I'll be interested in seeing to what extent they used the lead DRGR model, to be honest with you, which was, could it have been better? Yeah, sure, it could have. But it was really a good first step, and the county has probably done more since then to make improvements on it. So those studies in the city need to be looking at the work that's being done in Lee County, because that's where the water is coming from in large part.
I have a
So-
question.
Yes, ma'am.
As far as comprehensive restoration is concerned, how expensive is it? I mean, what, once we get this information, I'm concerned with three things: whether we can pay for it, whether it's legal, and just the thing that I don't like for these past 20 years is just everybody walking away say, well, I feel better now, and then nothing happens.
Right.
You know, we all understand it, and we all would love this to happen, but it's not possible, and so we walk away, and then time passes, we have another study. So I think I really enjoyed both the reading it and seeing your presentation, but I wonder about the cost of restoration ecology.
That's why we can't do everything. And that's why the restoration areas were prioritized, so that a governing body would be able to look and say, look, if we've only got so much time, we only have so much money to do something, where do we get the most bang for our buck? And I can point you to those two areas in the Lee DRGR right now. Could I have done that before the study? Maybe just as a matter of intuition, but now I got the proof, you see. And I think what you need to have is a similar tool, so that you can say, well, for these reasons, these are the priority areas that we should be looking at. And then don't just stop right there and be subject to whatever it costs you. Then you actually do the detailed work on a specific project. When you talk about redeveloping infrastructure, doing something with a road, putting pipes under railroad tracks, doing various things that you might have to do, there's a price tag associated with all of that. So that's where you're looking at getting the most bang for your restoration buck. That's a really important part of the process that we work with. Doesn't matter whether it's in Florida or anywhere, is because it all comes down to how much time do you have, which is never enough time, and how much money do you have, and you never have enough money. So you have to work within a budget of time and money, and make some informed decisions about what's the most important thing to the people here in the city of Bonita Springs. And you do have these other studies, so there's other information that will be applied to it. And the more developed an area becomes, the corollary is typically the more expensive the restoration can be. So you really want to be sure about what you're doing and what the outcomes are going to be. If it's something, say, that substantially increases the capacity to store water that you can make potable, that's worth something. And very few studies actually put a price tag on what a gallon or an acre foot of water is actually worth. That water sitting on the landscape has value.
Fred, you had a question?
Yeah, I have, 2 points. Number one, I kind of piggybacking between what Tori said and Kevin said, it would seem to me that one of the ways you could pay for some of the restoration would be that, let's hypothetically say there's 1,000 acres that could be developed, hypothetically, and you take a lot of that impact money, and I think the Bracco report or plan was even advocating a special assessment on it, and then you divert some of that money to pay for the restoration and purchase of land in another spot. Now my question really is, it's kind of to Nicole and to Audrey, should we defer this and let Kevin get together with, I guess, his staff, and I think someone from the committee should be talking to him, and I don't have any problem if it's Nicole, unless Audrey says, to where this scope of work can be adjusted and the dollar adjusted to what we really need to do, realizing that there's a limit,
Well,
which
again,
I understand clearly.
Right, I have a city council meeting scheduled for Wednesday.
And I guess my question is, should we defer it so that this can be done? Because I don't see a lot of value in going through and getting something approved and then having to come right back to. So I'm just posing the question, I guess, to Kevin, Nicole, and Audrey.
Can I be honest
Three-way
with
conversation.
Can I be honest with you? All right, I think what is being proposed now is the first step that you need to take no matter what. All right, and you don't have a lot of time because it's already March. And this work is not going to take that long to do, but if you decide in your discussions that you want to go forward, you need to have the time to be able to, to do that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I think that Audrey is able, in her agenda item on Wednesday, to have that full contract package with the 4,000 plus, so 23,000.
Right, 19, you mean 19 and 4?
The 19 and the 4.
Oh, thank God. I was going to say, if you told me more than the 23, I was going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Yes, and we have a budget resolution that we also have to pass when we do it, so that would also need to be amended and added. And yes, I would have actually, shortly after this meeting, if you approve to go forward, I would have something going into our errata sheet, because that's what I explained to council. We couldn't meet with Mr. Irwin until today. So we met with him this morning, Mr. Gucciardo and myself. There were some questions, just some clear, mostly scatological clearing up of words to make sure. Sometimes we use the term the study area, and I wanted to make sure we're not talking Baracco study area, we're not talking the DRGR, we're talking his study, which is all of the city of Bonita Springs DRGR. So that's it. Each of these different studies had different defining areas.
But would there be a benefit in deferring
Only
vote?
as long as you're okay with tasks 1 and 2. Now, understand, Florida statute 287-055, and I keep drumming it in. Yes, it has that $35,000 because it's a planning or feasibility study under $35,000. But if the study starts creeping above the $35,000 study amount, the statute says you're supposed to throw away, you're supposed to then, like, for example, if Mr. Irwin gave us a study amount at a certain dollar threshold, but we received other proposals, we followed an alternative process, we didn't go out to selection, competitive selection per the statute, we are supposed to say if any others came above the 35,000, we are supposed to not follow through with that 35,000. So if the objective here is is that you expect to go over 35,000 and you just want it to go under the 35. If this is material tasks 1 and 2, if it's something that's not transferable to another person, should we go through a selection process, and during the selection process, Mr. Irwin certainly could go for the selection, but if there's other people in the game and say the committee agrees with somebody else, is this now wasted, task 1 and 2, or is it something that's valuable to the next level of study?
Does this include the modeling? Because you're going to have to,
No.
but wouldn't that put it over budget in any case?
That would be other stages of a study. So the model, as I understand it, would be done by probably an
And
engineering
you'd have other
firm.
people working on it as well.
Right, so they would have fees as well. So
Correct.
this is a much more expensive overall.
This is a beginning planning and feasibility study for potentially another planning and feasibility study that could be very expensive. And depending on the modeling, depending on what else, it's however this committee, Water Strategy Task Force, and whatever city council says is necessary going forward. So if you think that this study, sections 1 and 2, or scopes 1 and 2, are probative, you're able to use that material, and somebody can take that material and then take it to somewhere else. If you think that scope 1 is just mobilization for Mr. Irwin, and it is not transferable, if we have to pay for it for another entity, then that's not, not something necessarily valuable. But it might be. It depends on, he might take that and make a nice report, and with that report, somebody else can take that snapshot, and then working on that snapshot, be able to move on, or he could be selected.
And
not
there will be
precluded from selection.
deliverables in the
There's
slide.
deliverables in
So
each
there are
scope. Right.
deliverables, and with the funding to allow him to participate in meetings and those sorts of things, it still is under the $35,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Question, when would the deliverables be available?
Well, from the time that we get started working, we would work on both tasks simultaneously. And it would be within just a little over 2 months, about 70 days, to get to the end of task 2.
Right.
Kevin, I'm sorry.
Dennis?
I just had this is beyond task 1 and 2, so I apologize, but I think it all kind of fits into the scope in some way. The lightning rod, of course, on the Lee County DRGR was the mining. You know, basically that was a lightning rod and ended up with 3 or 4 lawsuits that are still active, I think. But, and I think here, there's a couple of points I would make is, first of all, there needs to be some interaction with the landowners and that sort of thing as well, I think, that are out there for private property rights. But there was, the lightning rod here was first flooding. Does development cause additional flooding? Second, does a development cause additional water quality degradation? And third, does the development, is it good or bad for recharge? How do we, like you want to raise water levels so that you have a better recharge for your wells? I think that those are the 3 things, and I'm not sure if any of those are driven by, or maybe you can answer this. Are they driven by restoration or driven by kind of what I've been saying is we kind of need to extend what we've been doing and make certain valid assumptions on what type of development and what are the standards that they would work under?
Well, the second part of my answer to Tori was the fact that not all of what we proposed in our recommendations to the board of Lee County was restoration. For instance, the farmland in the DRGR, all right? Farmland is not that different from wetland when it comes to water, all right? Farmers today are very cognizant of spending money. They don't want to over-drain the property. It costs money to drain the property in the first place, especially if they have to turn on a pump. So we proposed that Lee County start working with the farmers on BMPs, all right, to make those farms more sustainable, to make them so that they are actually storing more water, you know, polluting less. Many of them are already doing that, probably, you know, perhaps. But that's a way of addressing a lot of that blue area that you saw, a lot of the converted wetland that's now farmland, without actually restoring it. Maybe stage 2 or 3 down the road, 10, 20, 30 years or more, actually gets down to restoring the property when the farmer comes to the county and says, you know, I'm done. I don't want to grow potatoes anymore. You know, if you'd like to buy this, I'll sell it to you for restoration.
But traditionally, they've sold it to developers. And then use the single property owners of 5 acres to be kind of, they don't want to deal with 80 people in this one section, so it's better to take that as DRGR land and then buy the tomato field and put a big housing development on it. And that's where, I know you're smiling, but that is the
Where it gets
Lee
complicated.
County's history. And, you know, I think that we've had from Southwest Florida Water Management and from the Baracco study that allowing, if you're going in with a company that will, or a developer that can put some restoration ecology work into parts, which is what I think Fred was talking about, that, you know, you're willing to mitigate with that's going to be easier than negotiating with 700 5
You need to know
parcels.
where you're going to do it, all right, and what you're going to do, you see. And some of it is not restoration, some of it may just be a different management practice, you see. And some of it might include restoration as well. But you need some guidance to determine, you know, what areas you should be looking at.
But it would seem to me logical that you are only looking at the areas that, I just know East Bonita folk, and we're all very independent, and getting 80 together to all agree that, okay, this is what we want to do here is a big, and what you can do legally. Because I know when I went about the annexation of Section 29, that was exactly the situation, and there were people that were suspicious, there were people that jumped in, that's why that's got that jagged edge. So this is, I think that we have to really keep that in mind.
Well, and I think one of the benefits of if this goes through the entirety of the process, we'll have that decision-making tool so that the hundreds of people in East Bonita that own small parcels, we can show if we do this, then that's what happens. Having that kind of living tool where you can have the if this, then this is the result type scenarios, helps people understand how the water basically moves around if you do certain land use
But
scenarios.
are you assuming that those people will therefore not build on their 5-acre parcel that they've been dreaming of coming to? Or as one of my friends has 20 acres and both their kids have grown up and want to move back with the grandchildren, and they can't put 3 houses on their 20 acres. They can only put 2. So this is the argument about spending too much money. I'm not saying yay or nay. I'm just trying to say that this is, it's not just that we decide this is what we want to do.
Fred?
Yeah, just simple question. Kevin, I'm guessing, but I don't know, and then even if you answer the question the way I think it will be, it'll be what city council decides, which may not be what you recommend, but won't the land and the flowways and all that kind of give you what lands would be your number 1 pick, and that maybe the number 2 pick would happen to be a tract of land, but it might have 30 or 40 different small landowners in it, because that's an opportunity based on topography, where flowways are and all that? Just a question.
Yes, and that's why you have more than one alternative, because it's likely that you might not be able to go with any of them. It might be a combination of 1 and 3, something like that, to be able to, give you what you need, but also something that the people will support. Well aware of the concerns that you have. But if you don't start with good science, good engineering, then it can really be a mess. Then people can really be hurt, not just because of those reasons, but because they've invested money in infrastructure now that doesn't work the way they thought it was going to work, because they don't have the water available that they thought they were going to have available. So I want to make sure that I addressed your questions here, and I didn't talk a lot about the impact of the Innocent Farms property, about development there. Quite frankly, I don't feel comfortable doing that because I don't have the information. The information I have is the information that I presented in the lead DRGR study. One of the advantages of the Bonita study is that we'll actually be able to ground truth and hopefully get out and see areas on the ground. Maybe that'll be possible with this. I don't know, but I do know that there is a significant capacity to store water on that piece of property there. It's mostly natural still. The farm fields that are there, you could restore them or not, and you're still going to be able to store the same amount of water, actually, if that's what your goal is, whether it's a wetland or not there. So it is a huge opportunity for somebody. I'm telling you the same thing I told the 2020 people. And it would be a shame for that to be an opportunity lost, either for conservation or for some kind of sustainable development practice, something in there that you have a chance to be involved in the process as far as what the outcome's going to be, and instead of somebody coming in there and doing something that makes you think, gee, I wish we would have been involved.
And you're speaking of Edison.
Edison
Yeah.
Farms. Yes, sir.
Will you be assuming, and maybe this is a question for us to discuss, the Spring Creek crossing that I know it was in the watershed plan, there was an additional crossing, and I know you all, Conservancy has said, yes, we'd like to see that happen, and there's some downstream things in there as well. Is that something that would affect your modeling, that you would say yes or no, or does it help or hurt? I mean,
In the first stage, I think we would show you at face value from the ecological information, what the ramifications might be. But I'm really encouraging you to think about what the engineering is going to give you as a next step, because then it's going to really be able to answer your question and support it, and also be able to provide you with enough information to be able to get a pretty good cost figure for what it would take to actually do the work.
John?
Before we finish up with Kevin, I'd like to bring it back to where Audrey first started the conversation when he ended, which was that in our conversations with Kevin this morning, we determined that the figure of the recommendation of $19,000 to go ahead with tasks 1 and 2 was not sufficient. So I guess I need an actual vote so I can get a consensus of the task force, are you okay with upping that by $4,000 to $23,000, which Kevin tells us does cover all that he would need in terms of presentations for both the task force and the city council? So I would ask you to give me some
And-
kind of a sign on that.
And also, just to clarify, Kevin, as tasks 1 and 2 as a standalone work product, could you specify what our deliverables will be so that the committee has an understanding of, if it doesn't go beyond that to additional modeling, what beneficial work product will you be giving us?
If you remember during the presentation I gave you on the lead DRGR, all right, it would be similar to that, and fine-tuned for your own purposes. But what it's going to show you is, what your historic conditions were, what your existing conditions are today, and where you have opportunities and constraints. Okay, things like pits might be constraints. All right. Things like open land, farmland might be an opportunity, you see. And laying all those out, it doesn't matter what's in my mind. I mean, it matters how you take that information and then go forward with it, you see. But then it's going to give you the options as far as, well, I'm looking at this, this seems like a no-brainer. We'll deal with those first, and then look at the ones that are more problematic. You may not have that right now in the city DRGR. So that is one of the important things that would be a deliverable is enabling you to have that kind of information, whether you take it to an advanced process or not.
If I can, tasks 1 and 2 do have deliverables and time schedule. Poor Mr. Orwin didn't have the report in front of him, so let me just be very specific as to it. In both cases, we're getting a written report. The first report synthesizes the ecological and hydrological significance, identifies any information gaps, and does provide recommendations. These are his recommendations on filling information gaps for the future land use decision-making tool for the city. So in other words, he would give comp plan suggestions of fill in the gaps, subject to, of course, the committee's ultimate determination what to do with his material. On a time schedule of task 1, once a notice to proceed is issued, within 2 weeks, Mr. Irwin will let the city know if there's any additional reference materials. The reference materials that we have are on the city's website. It's pretty comprehensive, fairly comprehensive.
I don't
He
know
hasn't
what
delved
I don't
into
know
it
what
yet,
should be
so-
there. So
Right, he hasn't delved in, but if he identifies that there's additional reference materials that are necessary from the city, he'll let us know. Once we've provided all the reference materials, which hopefully we did already by having it on the website, but if there's additional needed, then he'll provide the report to the Clean Water Task Force. The second part of it is the ecological mapping. Again, you've heard, and I believe you had the screen up there, and there was some minor modifications, but it's, originally he had a certain amount of acreage outside of the city, and you could not tell from the acreage whether he was talking it was 2 sections of land, but it's not actually 2 sections, it's more of the adjacent buffer. So instead of going with some kind of acreage, we just said the adjacent lands outside of the cities to integrate Lee County DRGR with the Bonita Springs DRGR. Same, rest of the scope is the same, and his time schedule would be 70 days following the issuance of the notice to proceed. So within 60 days, and actually, task 2 could be done before task 1 according to this schedule, but I don't think that was the intent.
they parallel each other.
Yeah, they should be parallel, but it's potential to happen, but I doubt it would.
Thank you. And the $4,000, what will we be getting for that? What do you anticipate your meetings will be? And
Well, again, if I had actually written a scope, instead of having that one that was circulated for information purposes earlier, that would have been included in 1 and 2. That would have just been in there as part of the meeting requirements, being able to meet with the client, being able to meet with the city council. Probably, I'm suggesting that your staff have a workshop with Lee County to talk about their DRGR, so that right away that both groups can get on the same page as far as what their intentions are.
I have another question. in reading these 9 points, I had the question of how many of these have been accomplished, and the reason that I'm bringing this up again is because some of your suggestions for the Lee County were to prepare a hydrological model of the study area, implement comprehensive long-term surface and groundwater monitoring, develop and refine water budgets for each of the watershed. That looks like a lot more work and study. And you wanted to obtain accurate topography. I would like to know that there weren't anything like that suggested after you, that all those things were done. Because if we get to the end of this and then we need to have rain gauges out there for the next 3 years, it just,
All right, I'm going to answer your question, and I'm not trying to make you happy, okay? So you may not be happy. But there are things that Lee County has done. Given the constraints that we've all had economically the past several years, you know, they have moved forward with some things, I'm sure of. That's why I want to have a meeting with them from the very beginning so that that question is answered. You know, the topography, they have LiDAR and everything right now. I mean, it's amazing what the resources that we do have. Have they actually selected a watershed and not studied it, started collecting data? See, that's the thing nobody likes to do. You know, I'm not in favor of just doing studies. You got to have data to make a study actually meaningful in many cases.
but
And
then will the
that's
city,
where they were,
but
and that's
then will
where
the
they were
city
lacking.
council say, well, we can't make a decision until we've collected our data for the next 3 years? And
No,
that's
I-
what I think that we're really trying to avoid,
Well,
is not more questions at the end.
right.
And-
And I'd like to say there's not going to be any more questions at the end, but that's not going to happen because there's too many people involved that have got, you know, some real passionate feelings about what is and what should be. And I is, you know, if I'm, you know, acting as your liaison, your leader through this process, I'm going to be encouraging you to make decisions that are basically well-informed decisions. And my recommendations to Lee County were to take that information that we gave them and based upon that, you know, and other things that they're working on, select some areas and actually start to do those things that you need to do to be able to do restoration, to be able to do land use planning. Understand that when that work was done, there was a paucity of data, of information, of any kind, you know, in that area, all right? You're way ahead of that now, today. You know, the topography, for instance, is available, you see. So, you know, how much of that they have actually done, you know, I don't know. But I'm sure they've done some of those
Had a long
things.
list of things you wanted to have done.
Yeah, but if you notice on there, it was all about them doing some things, basically to put more beef, more stature in that macro work that we had done. In other words, we didn't say, you know, you're done, everything that you want to do, you can do, just look at this, you know, report. It put things in perspective for them. And one of the things it did is it really made it loud and clear based upon our model that you didn't want to spread those mines out all over the landscape. That was critical. So it did answer some real vital questions, all right? And as far as the recommendations I was making, you know, it was basically, you need to do these things for the public, all right? All right, to make it, not just to improve the process, but to make sure the outcomes give you, you know, what you need. And this, you're looking at the future water supply area for Lee County. It's an investment, but it's not just about spending money. Again, that water is worth something. If you have to buy that water from somebody else, you know, there's a price tag associated with it. And that's what I think we all need to keep in mind, is that, you know, when it's sitting out there on the landscape, it actually has value.
But just to clarify, deliverables from tasks 1 and 2, you do believe that there's solid information out there, that you will be able to do the work that you have said you're going to do for those tasks, and give us deliverables without saying, wait a minute, we need to do X, Y, and Z before I can give you those deliverables.
If you decide not to move forward, okay, you know, at least with any additional work, you can take that work and apply it to, you know, future land use decisions where you're thinking about doing things. If you decide to take additional steps, then you've heard what my recommendations are in that regard.
Okay, any additional questions for Kevin? Okay, thank you, Kevin. And the task force needs to discuss the idea of adding the $4,000 to the contract, if we believe that that is appropriate. And I will take public comment on that after we have a little discussion, make a motion on this. So is there a motion?
Make the motion.
I'll second.
And the motion is to recommend that City Council include the additional $4,000 for Kevin to participate in meetings with the committee and with council and with staff, and possibly a workshop with Lee County.
Yes.
Okay? There's a motion
Now,
and a
the
second.
workshop with Lee County, he excluded, are you now including that in if staff is to meet? That was,
Whatever's easiest for you all.
I mean, he had it, well, what's easiest is as long as I understand what the contract is. So, let me just make sure I understand Kevin, you agree that the 4,000, if staff needs to have a meeting, we could say workshop, at a meeting between city staff and the county on the DRGR, that 4,000 would include that?
That's fine.
Okay, that's what I needed to
Try
know.
to have the meeting in 4 hours.
Yes, no, we would.
And the clarification, that would be with city staff, county staff, and Kevin.
Mr. Irwin.
And not this group, though? Is that the way we understand?
That's the way I understood, that it'd be staff for the integration of the two. Now, that might be after recommendations are all complete.
I'm not trying to control all the people that attend that meeting. The people that I'm most interested in are the people that would actually be working on DRGR activities for Lee County, so that your staff and myself have a chance to hear from them as far as, here's what we've done, this is what we're working on, these are the issues that we have. That kind of information sharing needs to be, occurring. So I don't have any problem with anybody attending the meeting,
Right.
as long as the
Yeah.
right people are there.
If we're observers, we can't go. to
No,
one-
well, generally, it's not a sunshine meeting, but we don't have a problem. I mean, obviously, up to sunshine law, I wouldn't want to have to notice the meeting. In other words, if I had two of you, I'd prefer if it's just one person, if that would be okay with the committee. What I envision, because we're talking DRGR, would be talking natural resource management at Lee County, which means probably that computes closer to
You're
our
probably
community
talking about
development.
Roland's
Yeah,
group. You'd be
Roland's
talking
group.
about Mary Gibbs'
And the
group.
community development, exactly, those
Can
two
I-
groups.
can
And
I-
probably somebody from their planning, because, like, yeah, I know Rob, would be on their side, and then on ours, Mike is probably one of their attorneys, but we probably would add this to an urban services agreement, which is something that we need in that area anyway, regardless of the DRGR issues. But we'd keep the DRGR separate to that, but so we could get that.
Do you understand why
coordinated.
I'm suggesting you have that meeting?
Yeah.
But you're saying us. You say you, I mean.
I mean, no, I'm saying the city.
Oh,
I mean,
okay, yeah.
we definitely need to have that meeting so that we're able to eventually join those areas. So it's, because we're talking about the same water resource.
John?
I'm sorry. I really believe that we're getting far afield and way more complicated than we need to. All Kevin was suggesting that at some point, staff of the city talk to staff of the county about what's going on their end on the DRGR, and we incorporate that information, period. We can do that a number of different ways, and we can figure that later on. But that's really all we're talking about. The question I'm still trying to get some feedback on here is adding the additional $4,000 to the contract.
And we have a motion and a second, and is there additional discussion on the task force?
Public comment.
Public comment then?
My name is Deborah McLean, and I'm the publisher of the Banana Peel. And I don't have any objection to the additional $4,000 to have this gentleman attend additional meetings to help soothe over the general public's concerns and his work, his scope of work. I do have a question, though, that stuck in my mind from the last meeting. I believe it was Dennis Gilkey mentioned that we have 55 inches of annual rainfall. And I did grow up here, moving here from Boston in 1954. And I'm wondering if someone could point me in the right direction. I'll do the work. I would like to have some kind of graph of annual rainfall, because if I recall, as a little girl, we had 2 rainy seasons. One was the monsoons, and one was a lesser rainy season. So I am very interested in the annual rainfall and how it has disappeared as we drove eastward in Naples, where I grew up, the Golden Gate, roads to nowhere, and drained the Everglades, and therefore the standing water. So the goal here is to keep our standing water to refill our aquifers. So I'm curious as to where I can go and get accurate data on the annual rainfall in this particular area, Lee and Collier County, from 1954 to 2014. And my phone is 287-2510.
Thank you, and I think probably the folks from the Water Management District might be able to help you with that. Yes.
My name is Alberto Bayer, resident since 1991. I'm wondering where Paul Pass is, and I'd like, for the record, to remind you all that I had made a recommendation that there be an alternate task member in the event that any of you would not be able to attend. And given that it is my understanding that I was the first member of the public that supplicated that a task force be created in lieu of having council move forward with the decision-making hereof, I felt that I would be one that would be likely a good option for this. I'd like to express my superlative delight for Kevin Irwin's involvement in this matter. And I'd like for you all to consider Mr. Livingston too as a individual to partake intricately in this process. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Donna Stone. Again, I live at Worthington Country Club on the External Affairs. I've been writing notes, and I hope I can get this all out clearly. I would encourage Kevin and this board to also please develop a zoning recommendation overlay. This is extremely important for this area. We need to show land that right now, for example, may only have 1 house per acre allowed, that it could possibly be increased to 3 houses per acre, but only with sewer and water hookups, and topography allowances on the land. For example, no dikes, yes, canals, what the water retention might have to be, landscaping recommendations for that land, and also hard surface allowances, what the maximum size house or paving would be allowed. This is an extremely important part of this DRGR area, that we have to look at the whole big picture, not just the water, but we have to look at what is going to go on the land, what is on the land now, what we will allow in the future. This is an all-encompassing thing, and we have to really look at models and guidelines to be able to give to the planning board, to be able to give to the city for our future needs. For example, we have the mine. How many houses? What type of population we would allow? What type of land use? Water retention, the whole 9 yards has to be put down now in order for us to be protected by developers and also homeowners to be protected. So like you say, your friends that want to have their family move into their property, they would be allowed to, so in the future, with proper guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, the motion on the table is to include another $4,000 for the Irwin contract. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to that issue?
I have
Okay.
just the issue
Comment?
of,
Yes.
just several people have brought up the issue of more expensive water. we are spending the taxpayers' money. That's, I just want to make sure that that's on record, that for each of these requests, there's more and more money, and although we might not call it a study, it's still an investment for a lot of people who have said, you know, we don't want to go into that aquifer, we don't want to desalinate, we don't want to do this because our money might cost a little, our water might cost a little more. Now, I'm not saying I'm in agreement with that. I think the water is super important. That's why I'm here. But I think that we have to be very cognizant as we go along that we're starting down a real expensive road. I just need to say that.
Thank you. Any additional discussion?
I would just say, Kevin Irwin is a very high professional, and I think a lot of him. But I did object to the approval of the study, and I'm going to have to object to this more in the process, not really even at this point in time, that I wouldn't want to give him more money for doing those important things. But I just think this process has not been the best way to go about defining the scope that we need. And I know there's no question in my mind that when we get to those other tasks, there's going to be changes, and those are things that we should probably have discussed first, not later. So.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is come up in the same way. You know, all of a sudden we're here and here's this proposal and we haven't had any idea it was coming, and it's kind of going around about it backwards. But
Yeah, I would like to agree with Dennis on one point, or a couple points. Number one, there's a $35,000 limit. We cannot go over that with Kevin Irwin, period, without going out and advertising and taking RFQs. Now, there was one thing said at least two meetings, and is, well, how do we know that somebody wouldn't do this for half the price? Professional service contracts, you're supposed to pick the most qualified, the second most qualified, third most, and then you have to negotiate a fair and reasonable price with the number one. But if you can't mutually agree upon what's a fair and reasonable price, then you go to number two. And the interesting thing is, if number one then drops his price, you can't go back to number one. It's a one-way street. So there's a misconception, I think, and I think even the audience or some of the audience may have it, that on professional service contracts, you bid it out. There is no bid of money.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Motion passes 4-2. Next item is the continuing discussion of next steps. And John, who do we have on board for presenting at the next meeting?
The next meeting, we had Public Works, who were scheduled to come in and talk about their efforts towards NPDES and stormwater quality and maintenance of our drainage system and infrastructure. I think it'll be very informative. They will probably prepare a brief PowerPoint presentation also. Try to get that the copy from Kevin, by the way, before he leaves, so we get that one for you today. In terms of the next steps for the group to discuss, that you also got a handout today from Fred. It should have been on your desk there. And at the last meeting, there was an attempt, I think, a really good start by both Dave and Dennis to kind of outline things that the group might want to consider and timelines for achieving them. Not sure how far into a additional discussion you want to go on that today, but that's certainly up to you. Not sure if you'll have time to incorporate comments about Fred's information, since again that was just available today, but certainly up to the group how far you want to take that.
Could I
Fred, go ahead.
Could I at least give you a highlight of what I proposed in this, and then you all can read it. But as I see it, there's two major things we need to do. One of them, whether it's what was in the resolution that the city council passed or not, doesn't make any difference, but at least a significant number of city council believe that we should read the various reports and come back to them with some recommendations about those reports and where we go and so forth. And I agree with them. This is long overdue, and I would urge that we would break it into 3 categories. Probably the first one is we would read the reports on aquifers. I mean, to try and put to rest, or at least get a better idea on, does the water that stands in the DRGR, at least during the rainy season, does it significantly contribute to our aquifers, point 1, point 2, to some of our well fields? And when we do this, I'll explain how I would propose we do it, but we need to read the available literature, and I agree with Dennis. There's what's called adopted reports. There are other reports that are funded by the government, and there are other reports that are funded by developers or those interested in developing the DRGR. I think we must read each of those, like in the case of the aquifer. I think the Mesmer report, I think that was funded by private funds, I believe. If I'm wrong, somebody can correct me. Then we have the Rawl report and the Denisi report that were funded, I believe, by the city. And the reports in total were not adopted, but part of the report deals with the aquifers, and part of it is what I call land planning recommendations. And then I think we need to take those, after we read them, we need to go back and read the Baracco report / plan and see if we agree with what they have gleaned and said, this is what all these other reports say, and the conclusions they drew from them. And then what we would do, the way I think I'm proposing we would do it, probably it would take 2 months' worth of meetings to go through that topic, and we would just read those reports, and hopefully we would pick a couple at a time that we go through so we compare notes, because at the end, we're going to try to come up with a consensus of what we agree. There might be a minority report here and there, which is okay, but I think City Council is expecting us to do that. After we do that, I think probably, and it's arguable which one we should do next, whether it would be the anything pertaining to reducing the total maximum daily load, and there are less reports, I think, there, unfortunately, especially specifically aimed at the DRGR. And then the last one, or it could be the second one, will be the flooding. And again, that area in the Baracco report was not studied nearly as extensively as other areas. Then probably after we do that, we may want to include the transportation area and some of the things that get into some of the land planning thoughts and all that. So what I'm saying is, if we accepted that as an approach, we're looking at, depending on whether we only do the 3 or we do 4, we're looking at 6 to 8 months worth of work. And but I think it needs to be done. Some of them may not take that 2 months. There is that hope that it wouldn't. Once we would get through that, then the other thing that I think we need to do, and we need to do it concurrently, and even though Kevin's work will not be deliverable goods, so to speak, for 70 days roughly from when he starts, we would end up starting to rough out a statement of work, a scope of work for the companion studies that should go on. And as part of that, and these would be advertised, we would get requests for qualification packets. And at the first meeting that we had, and a question I asked Carl Schwain, I said, can the committee be the selection panel? And he said yes, subject to, of course, City Council approving any recommendations. And in that, because it would be competitive, which, and that's just to make sure, even if it was less than 35,000, I think it wouldn't be a problem. We would also have to establish, before we get those packets in, the evaluation criteria, because if you wait till you get the packets in, then you're subject to the criticism, well, hell, you made the criteria up to fit the guy that you got the package in that you want. So you do that, we have a discussion about that criteria. Those are the main things that I see that we need to do. There's other things that I put in this, but I think that we need to get going on reading those reports because they're voluminous. Somebody said, I think the Southwest Florida flood mitigation or the watershed study of 2009 is something like 30 million bytes? There's a lot of pages. It would burn up all your printer printing them out, so you want to find somebody else that'll print them if you're going to do it that way.
Well, it sounds like you have a couple suggestions, and I think having a certain number of maybe one, or if they're small, a couple studies that the committee is given as a homework assignment
Right.
to then be able to discuss at the next meeting, so that we have homework assignments each time and we're able to be well-versed on certain studies or work projects and reports, I think is a good idea. I think that can get some creative ideas flowing. And then the second part is tying some of these things to sort of a part two of the modeling effort to actually take the static maps and create an interactive decision-making tool.
Right.
And I think that maybe, we need to get maybe some staff input on that and kind of flesh that out a little bit more. But I like the idea of having homework assignments so that everyone knows that the entire committee has read certain things and we're prepared to talk about that.
I agree in that we should pick the ones we're going to talk about at the next meeting because it keeps us from jumping around. But I'll tell you something. I have read them all, and I have copies of like the Rawl study, which is as big as my binder here, and I've sat through the presentations as well. And I'm telling you, I am not an engineer, and there are phases in those reports that are really, really hard to understand. It gets down to a lot of math and a lot of scientific information, and I think that we need to focus on certain parts of it, because just throwing it out there like we're going to take these two studies and talk about it, everybody's been talking about it for 20 years and they can't quite get around it. So I just want to make sure that we're not, Fred, biting off more than, because I don't even print a lot of them out anymore. I just read them online because they are extensive. And then the mapping, sometimes you're looking at it and you can't even see what they wrote on it. So
I think you have to go to the conclusions and recommendations behind most of
Okay.
them.
Okay.
May I jump in? I want to thank Fred for all the hard work putting this together. It took a lot of effort. And again, I'll share with Tori, I must have 4 inches or more of material sitting on my desk at home. And I'm organized very well because it's first in, first covered up. And, so it's a hard time finding what reports. So I would ask Fred if you could be so kind as to go through here and revise this down and maybe put some footnotes identifying the reports that we should looking at, and then tying that to some sort of topic area. These are all dealing with septic systems. These are dealing with floods. These are dealing with well fields, wet fields, whatever.
Right.
And focus this down a bit. And I'd like to see us at the end of a session, 2 or 3 hours, whatever, come up with a recommendation or two, and have accomplishments down as we go down the road. All right, here we've talked about septic systems, and here's our recommendation. Next topic, flooding. Next topic, the mind. And we sort of work the best we can to come up with something in terms of an output based on us reading the reports and getting it done. So, and then we're going to have this problem at the end. We'll have not enough time to get everything done. But if we start getting some recommendations early on a monthly basis or whatever, then we have a chance of completing things by the end of the time period.
If I could add, I agree with David, but the only thing is, let's take the aquifer thing. You're going to have a report was done by Mesmer, and he says there's no significant recharge from the water that stands on the DRGR. And you're going to and that was funded, let's say, privately. And you're going to come to the Rawls report and the Denisi report, and they're going to say there is significant recharge And that's funded by the city, but as Dennis will be quick to point out, neither one were officially adopted, because I think the part that wasn't really adopted was both of them concluded at the end there could be some type of development in the DRGR. And then you're going to come over to what the Baracco report says, which is supposed to be an amalgamation. And I would say that you can't really come to a firm conclusion until you've read each one of those, because there's conflicts between them, and then we discuss them. And then I think, I don't know, is Fred Parton still here? Yeah. Well, I think one thing that has come out, because when I was playing the tapes of the February the 3rd meeting and then another meeting, it appears that a number of us thought we were getting water out of two aquifers. The Tamiami, which I believe is a shower, the lower Tamiami or whatever, and then the Hawthorne, which is deeper, but it's another aquifer. And what I've picked up both at the South Florida Water Management and then something that Fred said was that I'm not sure we're really getting that much water out of Hawthorne. It appears that it's the Florida aquifer. Yeah. So,
That's what he said.
yeah. But I'm not sure when, for example, Greg Rawls did his study, whether he was looking at Tamiami and Hawthorne, or was he looking at Tamiami and Florida? So there may be a little clarification there.
I think it's clarification. I think Fred, I kind of agree that Brock report probably didn't say it accurately, or at least clearly on the summary of the reports, because there are conflicting. I think the
Right.
MISM report that he referenced was done by BSU, and that, I don't think it said there wasn't an interconnection of the aquifers. I think it said basically that with best management practice, I think Raw was the same, with best management practices, you can actually improve the situation. So I think both of those were consistent in that says, okay, there is a transmissivity coming down through the Bonita Marl.
Right.
And there's also this side flow that comes because the Tamiami is semi-confined. So I think it's really, I would rather also hear from, because I think you can read all of those reports and probably still be as confused as we all are today.
Right.
But I think it'd be good to hear back from the district and BSU or their experts at some point. Once we review those and we have our questions, let's ask the experts. I mean, because we're not going to be able to say this one's right and that one's wrong.
Right.
Or this one's kind of right and that one's kind of wrong. I mean,
Well, the only difference is that Mesmer report was '04, the Rawl report was '05, the Denisi, I think, was '07.
yeah. Mhm.
And so my guess is none of them are totally correct. And I don't know that we'll be able to cipher it out, but I do know there's conflicts. And I think in order to get the story, I would want to, if we're going to have Mismer in here, I sure want Greg Rawls in here. I don't know whether we can get him or whether the Conservancy could or what, but
I would, again, what I said is, I mean, it doesn't cost us anything to hear back from
Yeah.
the district.
Right.
Or they could bring in an expert on the groundwater, or from BSU if they've got consultants on tap that said, okay, we're the current expert now. I mean, I don't know how we go hire somebody or ask them to come in for free, but.
yeah.
Can I just interject at this point? One of the things that you'll see in your packet, I was going to bring it up under member items and report. Dave did a list, of kind of a breakdown of, well, actually, I apologize, it wasn't in your packet, came in afterwards, and I have it to hand out. But Dave had done a follow-up list of questions and considerations to go back to BSU with. And after the discussion, actually, we've heard from BSU and their consultants offering their assistance to the group. So things like that are very much available to you. Obviously, Phil Flood has indicated that the district would come in whenever they could do that if it fit their schedules, to talk with the group again if you had further questions. So I think it's a good idea if you as a group can focus on some of those studies, whichever ones you decide to look at whatever particular time. I think Tori makes a good suggestion. You might want to just focus on summaries, conclusions, and recommendations. Might be more user-friendly. And then at that point, want to follow up with some of these other experts that are available, that are here willing to be partners for you. It's probably
So-
something that's pretty doable. And if I'm hearing correctly, I will continue to keep on the agendas, the continuing discussion of next steps, continuing discussion of resources. And is it my understanding then that, I know Fred's been asked if he would consider fine-tuning what he gave out today?
If I would what, no?
I think you were asked if you would consider fine-tuning
Oh,
your handout from
sure,
today.
yeah, absolutely.
We have 3 weeks, I'll just remind the group, we have 3 weeks until the next meeting, so the group should have time to, if we can get that out, I'll get it to the group, consider it, give me your thoughts, we'll try to keep that in the packet for next time, and again, we have a little more time in between the meetings, so
Right.
might
I
work.
just, may I ask that my paper be included in the next package, please?
Oh, rather than handing it out
Well,
today?
please hand it out to both, and hopefully BSU can fully embellish the answers there.
Dennis?
Madam Chair, if, Kevin, you could give us a copy of you had a time chart of the tasks. I think that, could we get a copy
Could I
of
pass
that?
them down?
It was on one of your slides, that'd be good. The other thing I would just keep the group focused on is that we have the bigger, we can talk about the specifics of task and presenters, but we still have the big issue of water quantity, water quality, groundwater resources, and restoration, and how that all fits together. I think we
That's
just
got
have to
these-
keep in mind that those are the 4 big things that we're trying to integrate.
And-
And then the development that might or might not happen.
And Fred, I'd just like to say that, I know you said if there's going to be development out there. There is going to be development out there.
Oh, there,
You just mean major developments of larger impact, but I want to qualify again that there is going to be development out there. We're not talking about, going into a pristine area that we can just, do whatever we want with. There's going to be development already as it is, and that's what I think part of what the city's trying to do is to be proactive in the development that's already zoned and planned out there in a way that would help the infrastructure. I mean, that's where this all started, and I just have to make sure that that's clear.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think all I've said is that whatever we do that's different than the 1 acre and 10, I personally don't want to see it done until we know that we've got additional standards in place, that we are taking care of this water first. And then after that, it's fair game. If you start developing now and you don't have those standards, everybody will be grandfathered in and it'll all be done before you'd ever get the standards adopted, so it's...
So Fred, you'll work on maybe listing out specifically what topic areas and then what studies, and then we can discuss that at the next meeting, see if it looks like a reasonable workload and if it makes sense, and
right.
then start with the homework on that.
And along those lines of discussions about resources, just wanted to point out to you that if you check the city website, upper left-hand corner, there's a drop-down set for the group, and we are populating that with information as we get it. I think one of the only major things we haven't filled in yet are the maps, and that has a little to do with the size of the data and everything, but we should get those on pretty shortly.
As far as future presentations, for the presentation after the next, I know there had been some discussion of having Roger Kopp come and speak. Is he someone, John, that you've talked with to see if he would be available to provide a presentation?
No, I haven't gotten that far out in terms of details. I was waiting for feedback from the group because, again, we do have Public Works, and then we had a list of about, I think it was maybe 8 or 10 other options before we started doubling back on some of the other folks again, but totally up to you. If it's Roger, let me know. And
Roger's a hydrologist. He provided council a presentation on the DRGR a number of months ago. He worked with the Water Management District on the South Lee County Watershed Plan update and has a good technical understanding of the area.
Yeah, one on the presentations, I personally think that we should have any presentation by the Bracco team down the road, because I know, I'm almost confident, I'm confident that most of the people here probably saw that presentation a number of times. And I think the more we know what we've looked at these other areas, the better use we can make of a new presentation by them.
So John, what do you need from us? Would you like for us to prioritize who we believe would be important next presenters? I don't know if I have that list in front of me of the various potential
Why don't I
presenters.
suggest this, since we have a couple of weeks until the next presentation, so that puts the April meetings a little
distance
further
out.
out. I just asked the group, take a look at the list that we gave you. As a matter of fact, let me take that back. I will send you all an email with the list that we have already, and I think I've got another couple of offers of help since then. So I'll update the list sending out to you, and then if you could, just send it back to me in terms of what your priorities would be. I'll get a consensus, then I'll know who wants, where the numbers kind of play out, and then start contacting those people. Okay?
Great.
John?
Could I ask that the chairperson take the lead with pen and paper here after this information comes in? That we can have it your product rather than our product.
Well, if you contact me with your,
Right.
Your priorities
Right.
individually, I can kind of just tally them up and see how many voted, for one person
Okay.
next step. Make sense?
I was going to ask a question. I'm not sure if when the Public Works will present, but I want to either have in their presentation, or if it's more appropriate that it come through John Domer's shop. There is an additional stormwater management design criteria that John has mentioned to me, and I would like to have someone on city staff, either from John's shop or the Public Works, explain what, the details of this additional stormwater management criteria the city already has.
Well, if it's on stormwater management, I'm reasonably sure that's something that Public Works will be covering, but I'm not sure specifically what you're referring to.
Well, I believe
You can
that,
ask John to come
yeah,
up.
there's
If it's
John.
something- If it's a conversation you've had with him, maybe
Yeah.
you could share it with us.
I believe what you're talking about, Fred, is the fact that the Water Management District generally requires 1 inch of storage, whereas the city requires 1.5 inches.
Right.
So there's an additional storage capacity
Right.
above and beyond the district's requirement.
And what I'm interested in hearing a little more about is relate what that 1 inch, half an inch extra storage and what 1 inch of storage really means. Is that like stored for how long and so forth?
It's generally the calculation the engineers develop to balance the pre-development condition versus the post-development condition.
Right.
And providing an equal discharge rate.
Okay. So we're going to hold equivalent of 1.5 inches of rain before it starts to discharge.
Not necessarily the case. The storage capacity has got to hold 1.5 inches. The discharge rate after development occurs should be, within reason, identical to that prior to development
Right.
taking place.
I would just like to hear a real good discussion of how all that.
You probably want somebody that's better at describing it than me then.
Oh, no, you can, no, if we can go into it in detail. I don't know if you want to do it today, but.
That would be fine. I mean, we can work either coordination with the Water Management District or just members of our staff to.
Well, no, if you can do it, or the Public
Why
Works
don't
guy.
we?
I think that's an
yeah,
engineer
let's-
question, Fred.
Yeah, we could maybe have
I
someone
don't think that
address
would be.
that.
I don't think that would be part of the Public Works presentation. It's more
Well,
the
that's-
development shop, but
Yeah, right.
we
that's
can
what-
arrange for another.
All I would like to have is somebody come in and present to the panel, as well as those that tune in and, or in the audience, not only the process, but how this, what you're really doing.
I don't mind doing. That's not a problem.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. Okay, so,
Excuse me, too,
Yes.
if you would, and I think this is a question maybe for, it might be the district, but it might be Matt Feeney, our Public Works Director. I'd like to know a little bit more how the Kiel Canal weir works. And I know it was modified recently, and I'm not sure if that's a county or city public works or a district issue. I'd just like to know a little bit more about how that works, since that's the major flow into the Bear River.
And I know I should probably know this, but at one point there was talk about straightening the river. Are we still talking about straightening the river? I know then the recession hit and,
I guess I'm going to put on a different hat than my capacity as a city attorney for a few seconds. As far as Kiel Canal, it's outside of the city's jurisdiction. It is handled, I believe, by Lee County Department of Transportation. They're the ones who I believe has the keys. Unless, John, do you know of any changes to that?
do we have someone?
They're
coming
the
from
ones who actually have the keys to the lock of the weir to open it up. And I think last rainy season, it didn't get opened on time. It has to be opened out, obviously, before it's underneath water.
Well, Matt can probably give us an overview. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
Matt can do that. That's outside my scope. And then there is an agreement with Lee County as to, I'm trying to remember the name of the 2020 parcel. And it's to potentially, not necessarily, to do some corrective.
Pine Lake Preserve? Yeah.
Thank you.
And
The
there was
Pine-
talk about removing 2 90-degree turns and softening them.
Right.
Right.
That's-
It's not really straightening it, not like
Okay.
Kissimmee
Yeah.
Canal, but it is it's a retrofit of that area. And there is a signed agreement, but whether or not that'll ever come to fruition is debatable.
And do we have anyone from DOT coming at any point, John?
Again, I think we had them on the list,
Okay.
and it's up to you guys to tell me
Okay.
who you want. So when I send out the updated list, if there's somebody that's not on the list, please feel free to add it in.
Okay.
We can bring as many or as few as you want.
And then you'll provide that list with the tallies as part of the next meeting.
You got it.
Okay, very good. Anything else on next steps? Okay, moving on to discussion of additional resources and what we might need. Is there anything else that we believe we need as part of this process? What is happening with I guess it's now a self-guided DRGR tour, or is it just go out on your own and explore?
As of the last meeting, I thought that the consensus was to put that on hold because of some of the logistical issues. You're certainly welcome to go out on your own. I don't know if at some point we'll get back on that and decide that it's still necessary. I think one of the things you talked about was that if that did happen, it might just be a little more focused with particular areas, but for right now, that's on hold.
Okay.
Excuse me. Might we ask that we get a telephone number associated with each possible site visit so we can arrange things individually?
I'm sorry, I'm not following you.
If I wish to go visit something about the well fields,
Uh-huh.
is there a point of contact at BSU that I need to contact to talk to first?
Yeah, I
Right.
mean,
But that's a bad example.
no,
What
certainly,
about
I can provide you with contact information if you let me know that there's a particular place you want to go. Otherwise, I don't know how to do that unless you tell me in advance.
Well,
here's
didn't I
what
see a
wanna
list of potential field trips, or a field trip covering a bunch of activities?
I think I
Don't
did
know how
that.
to
And
do
what
that.
what I was thinking while you were saying that was maybe I could take that list and we could discuss it next time, add to it, whatever, and then put the key contact people.
Right.
And make sure that maybe even mark it on an aerial or a map or something, so you, if everybody agrees, oh yeah, those are important things to look at, yeah, let's,
Okay,
then we
thank
do it
you.
on our own, yeah.
Fred?
Well, I was going to, on that thing that we just left, what would be wrong, John, if I send you my Word file for what I wrote, and David sends his Word file? That way we can individually make little suggested changes to it. We could agree that whatever we put in would be italicized or something, and that way everybody gets it at the next meeting. You've got my thoughts on his thing, you got Nicole's thoughts on my thing, or whatever.
Yeah, and I know John may have practical reasons. My concern is sunshine violations. I mean, even if it doesn't go back to you, you've expressed your opinion, which you did in paper.
Right.
And discussing it in a committee is excellent and great if we can do that, which we have done.
Right.
But if you start having it where Nicole sends her comments and it somehow gets over to Colum, at this point, we're violating the sunshine law. It's creating a daisy chain communication and a conduit. You're using John as a conduit.
Okay.
There's Attorney General's explaining it if you want it.
Okay, next item, member items and reports. Does anyone have anything additional? I have just one quick thing that I wanted to bring up. Legislative session is starting, and of course, there are some good bills and some bad bills that are being proposed. We don't know where all these bills will end up at the end, but House Bill 703, I just wanted Audrey to address that. This is kind of the bill that encompasses all sorts of different issues, and one of them is that it would retroactively preempt local government authority to protect wetlands and springs and regulate stormwater runoff. So I would just like Audrey to address that, because some of our recommendations may be additional protections for these things, so we need to see if this passes in its current form, if the state would be preempting us.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, I mean, it's very poorly written. I have to point this out. And I've also been contacted by Ashley Stasel from Carol Green's office, who's our lobbyist. So I have been coordinating with her on it. The stuff that you're talking about is the changes to 163, 3162, subsection 3, 3I, and then a 1. It's kind of tricky because on that, you're using the term local government, but it doesn't affect cities. That only affects counties. So we don't have a bone in that one. Now, it doesn't mean, you know, how the county deals with things doesn't affect us. It does. I don't want to be that, you know, compartmentalized, but it doesn't, for example, if we're doing something, this is not the issue that I look at, or this is not the one I look at. There are other statutes, and this part of the statute, that applies only to the county's powers.
Okay.
So that one I don't. Now, I do find what's interesting, and I liked Chris Costello's comments because I'm agreeing with her for different reasons. Under comprehensive plans and the comp plan elements, and we're going to have some elements coming up soon that are mandated to do changes every 5 years. I have a charter, and my charter says that if we're going to have a vote, I need an affirmative vote of 4 council members. So a simple majority of who is present on a day could be 3 people, could be 2 people even. No, it can't be 2 people, it has to be 3 people, three or more. And under this, it says a simple majority vote, and that would violate our charter. I mean, if this passes, I would probably have to get an attorney, if I had a conflict, whether a simple majority or if I need to have my 4, depending on who's there on a day, I could have a problem. Might not have a problem, but I could. And Chris had a problem with that because she felt that preempted where people had super policy requirements for their, and Dade County is notorious for that. Dade County, for example, has super majorities for certain types of zoning and comprehensive plan changes. We don't. We're simple, but not simple enough to have simple majority. Chris had another point. That, again, this goes with, I call this the no take back rule. So if we do a comprehensive plan, and this is it's an interesting issue. I don't even know how to address this issue. There's a statute talking about the legal status of comp plans and saying that if you have a greenbelt exemption, it should not affect you. And everybody's agreed. You know, greenbelt, if you have a comp plan, it says general commercial or industrial, but you only have agricultural, it's always been an easy answer. That should not affect you. Not so easy with their new section 5B, because under that, it's, the way I read it, it's a no take back rule. So if the city has agriculture in a place, let's say our interchange area, because we have it in our I mean, we have it in DRGR, but I don't think agriculture, you don't need to worry about so much of that comp plan amendment area. But in the interchange area, let's say somebody goes through, we have a comp plan amendment in the interchange. Let's say we decide we want our interchange to be agricultural, and the land's being used for agricultural. We can't take back or rescind our comp plan designation interchange, so, which doesn't even make sense because, again, that's taking away from legislative powers. There are some other changes, but it doesn't affect the city. DEP would have 50-year jurisdiction in granting permits.
Is the state legislature in session yet?
It starts next week.
there's hundreds of these things come out every
Uh-huh.
year, and some of these, I've heard for the last 10 years, some of these things. So,
Sure.
we can chase these bunnies all day long, but and every once in a while, one of them gets through, and you have
Right.
to be cognizant and watch out for it, but
The main reason I looked at this statute was, our concern was our fertilizer ordinance, and I did not see anything in it that would affect our fertilizer ordinance. As
Been
far as
coming-
we get that preemption language every year, we make sure we search for it. Sometimes the legislature gets one through. They did with code enforcement liens about 2 years ago, where they kept putting it in a banking bill, and they finally got one, and they found it where we didn't catch it in time. So we usually do everybody does a search, Florida League of Cities, our consultant, or our lobbyist, as well as the other lobbyists out there. I didn't see anything in pain there, but I know that I saw Chris's comments too.
And I just wanted the committee to be aware, I think, of many of the bills that are in process and potentially will be moving forward when session begins. This one is the most concerning and probably the most directly applicable to what this committee's doing, so.
If
just,
anybody wants my copy of it, they're welcome to I have printouts here of it.
Audrey, does that happen to show what committee these various bills are handling them?
Right now, that doesn't, Online Sunshine, you could get it, and also I do know that Ashley did give me an update, but I don't remember what she said, but it is out of a certain committee.
Okay.
But that information, when you go into your legislative online search, you can find out that information.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to have a copy of it.
You can have my copy.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I have it on my computer, so.
David, yeah.
Jump in, please. Let me thank Dennis for providing these wonderful charts again. It's very helpful. If I understand this chart number one correctly, the red line denotes Lee County, the RGR area.
Yeah, let me give Kevin a copy. Excuse me, because this is here. If there's any questions, he can answer them too. Yeah, the map is, David, the pink is the Lee County. That I put a crayon mark on the Bonita, but that's not included in the 83,000 acres at the bottom. So the 83,000 is without the 50 or 5,000 acres or so.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. The lower left-hand side in big broad pink is...
That's Bonita.
That's Bonita.
That's your DR.
And then there's additional property besides that, you're saying?
Well, no, Lee County DRGR that Kevin discussed today was the 83,000 that's outside of Bonita, but in the Lee
Okay,
DRGR.
but there's no additional property here for the Bonita Springs BRDR.
No,
That's
no,
it.
that's
Okay.
pretty much the limits.
And the second chart talks about surface flowways.
Yeah, it just
It
is
has
a,
nothing to do with aquifers.
no, that's just the flow patterns. It's the same, pretty much what I think Kevin had shown with the blue areas being pretty much the wet areas.
Okay, all right, thank
wetland
you.
there.
Any other member items, reports? Okay, staff update.
Two items that I haven't touched on yet. We've already gone through some of them. Phil Flood sent in after your last meeting. He wanted to follow up on a question that came up about the Lower West Coast Aquifer Modeling Study that's underway. So we've got some information here for you.
Good.
And if after you've had a chance to take a look at that, if you want to get back to us with any other questions, we can get those over to Phil. And the last thing, again, because you've asked us to kind of keep our radar up on things that might be going on within the DRGR area. I don't think this is directly involved in some of the concerns that the task force is going to be working on, but it does touch on it tangentially. Community Development has let us know that the Bonita Grand Mine folks are in their offices now, talking to them about, they've got an application in there actually to try to reconstruct some of their drainage issues internally. What they're trying to do is to make sure that they've got better control over the way some of the flows work to actually protect some of their own conservation areas, and in times of emergencies be able to control the discharges more efficiently than they are now. So Community development is not overly concerned about it. They see this as a positive step. It's all internal to their structures, so.
As a mine activity?
Right.
Mine operation.
So again, we'll try to make sure that we've got our radar up, and as things like that come up, just at least be able to pass the information along to you.
And can we get a copy of that application once it's,
I think they're still going back and forth. Last I heard was that they had written them or were about to written back asking for some further information, but as we have something that's tangible, I'll get it to you.
great, thank you. Okay, next meeting, March 24th. Kevin?
Just a brief statement. I looked at the maps that you gave me. Anything and everything that somebody has that they'd like to pass along will be well received by us, but it's got to have how the information was derived. If it's got mapping on it, flowways 1960, if it's got, that's nice, but if you know how that information was actually developed, that's the critical, part of it. And that goes for anything that comes from the city or from the public or whatever, because that's what we really need to have. Otherwise, we're going to look at it and go, yeah, okay, and, it's not nearly as helpful.
Yeah, just, Kevin, the basins are per the 2011 and 2010 water management plans for the city, and then the culverts are per the Lee County culvert plan that they have.
Right.
So it's, Lee County culvert.
Thank you.
Okay,
It just, it starts tomorrow, March 4th, legislature.
okay, very good. Well, no other business, then meeting adjourned.
Thank you.